Hello everyone, like, subscribe, and share talk, fanfiction audiobook for next part.
Chapter 11, Choosing a Zanpakuto. Of course, while some were optimistic about Kyoya, there were also those who weren't. In terms of combat ability, the first 4 years at the Shino Academy covered the 4 fundamental Shinigami combat arts: Zanjutsu, Hakuda, Ho-Ho, and Kido. For most ordinary Shinigami, what they learned in these 4 years was enough to last them a lifetime. The training for 5th grade students focused on Zanzen, the primary purpose of which was to strengthen the connection between a Shinigami and their Asochi. In this regard, Shinigami with strong Riryoku had a significant advantage. The greater their Riryoku, the faster they could establish a bond with their Asochi, and the quicker they could nurture the spirit within it to forge their Zanpakuto. When Jin graduated from the Shino Academy, his Riryoku had already reached the 4th class. This was comparable to the level of a high-ranking officer in the Gotei 13. As for Kyoya, at this point, he had only just reached the 8th class of Riryoku. Those who doubted Kyoya's ability to break Jin's record believed that even if Kyoya had a high compatibility with his Asochi, his current level of Riryoku was insufficient to nurture the spirit within the Asochi to the point of being able to converse with him in just 4 months. On the other hand, those who believed Kyoya could break Jin's record argued that, whether for 5th or 6th grade students, the graduation exam involved battling experimental hollows. Given Kyoya's current displayed strength, not only could he easily handle experimental hollows, but even real hollows would likely be no match for him. In other words, if Kyoya wanted to, he could learn Zanzen and then immediately take the graduation exam alongside 6th students, passing the Shino Academy's assessment too. However, while at the academy, students could devote all their energy to training without worrying about anything else. Once they joined the Gotei 13 and became official Shinigami, they would have to fulfill their squad duties. For example, the 13th Division was the Purification Unit, whose members were stationed in the human world to perform soul burial on the souls of the deceased, guiding them to the Soul Society. They also purified hollows that entered the human world to devour human souls, as well as those that had degenerated due to certain circumstances. The 10th Division was the Patrol and Security Unit, responsible for patrolling the Sirete and handling various emergencies. Because of this, most students preferred to spend extra time in their 5th and 6th grades, giving themselves more time to nurture the spirit within their Asochi. As a result, almost every year, 1 or 2 genius Shinigami graduated from the Shino Academy having already achieved the Shikai of their Zanpakuto. As for Kyoya, well, 8th class Riryoku was decent for an average Shinigami. But for a genius like Kyoya, it was somewhat of a hindrance. Students with 6th rank Riryoku or higher could typically nurture the spirit within their Asochi to the point of conversation and thus achieve the initial Shikai of their Zanpakuto within a year. But with his 8th class Riryoku, Kyoya would likely need around 5 years to fully nurture the spirit within his Asochi. Now, the question was, what would Kyoya choose? Would he aim to break Jin's record? Or would he remain at the Shino Academy, biding his time? Nobody knows. After all, they weren't Kyoya. And quat, you're here, and quat, and quat. To be honest, I've been waiting for you for a long time, and quat. As Kyoya stepped into the classroom of Class 5A, before he could even hand over his application form, the instructor who taught Zanzen had already spoken. Clearly, no application was needed. The moment Kyoya appeared here, it meant he was now officially a 5th grade student at the Shino Academy. And quat, the training in the 5th grade mainly focuses on Zanzen, which strengthens the connection with an Asochi, and quat, come, I'll take you to the storage room to retrieve in Asochi first, and quat, Once you obtain your Asauchi, I'll teach you how to practice. Zanzen, and quat, and quat. Seeing how efficient the instructor was, Kyoya quickly followed. Rustle. A little over 10 minutes later, the 5th grade instructor pushed open a long sealed door and led Kyoya into the storage room. Under the light streaming through the doorway, Kyoya saw countless Asauchi scattered haphazardly across the floor. Some were neatly arranged on shelves. And quat? Go ahead, Kyoya, and quat, find the Asauchi that belongs to you among these, and quat. At this point, the teacher paused for a moment. And quat. If you sense that a particular Asauchi strongly attracts you, don't hesitate. Just choose that one, and quat. If you walk through the entire storage room and don't feel a connection with any of them, then just pick one at random, and quat. Hearing this, Kyoya froze for a moment before nodding. And quat. Understood. Sensei, and quat. The Zanpakuto used by the Shinigami of the Sairete are all nurtured from Asauchi, forged by the god of the sword, Nimaya Utsu. Among them, depending on the materials Nimaya used, Asauchi and the Riryoku of their wielders, the strength. Weaker Zanpakuto will perish along with their masters upon death, reverting to their initial Asauchi state, waiting for the next Shinigami to nurture them anew. However, the stronger Zanpakuto, even if their masters die, will at most fall into slumber rather than perish alongside them. Only when they sense the birth of a Shinigami compatible with them will they awaken from their slumber and form a bond with a new master. These Zanpakuto are crowned with the title of strongest. For example, Captain Commander Yamamoto's Zanpakuto, Ryujin Jaka, is the strongest fire-type Zanpakuto. Even if Yamamoto perishes, as long as a Shinigami compatible with Ryujin Jaka is born in the future, the sword will reappear in the world. All Zanpakuto bearing the title of strongest are recorded in the Sairete's Great Spirit Book Gallery. Each time one resurfaces, it heralds the rise of a new legend. Similarly, Shinigami who inherit the strongest Zanpakuto also exhibit significant differences in their Zanzen training. The strongest Zanpakuto actively communicate with their wielders, as long as the Shinigami meets their requirements. Achieving Shikai or even Bankai is as effortless as lifting a hand. Meanwhile, Asauchi that require the Shinigami to nurture their own spirit must be cultivated to the point where they can communicate before the first step toward Shikai is complete. After that, raising the Zanpakuto's spirit to the level where Bankai is possible takes even the most talented Shinigami at least 10 years. Chapter 12 Selecting Asauchi. This instructor had been instructing at the Shino Academy for over 100 years and naturally knew a thing or two about Zanpakuto. Kyoya's talent in Zanjutsu might very well have a connection to the strongest Zanjutsu type Zanpakuto, even if there wasn't currently a so-called strongest Zanjutsu type Zanpakuto. The Asauchi Kyoya selected now could potentially be nurtured into one in the future. Kyoya paced back and forth in the Asauchi storage room, closing his eyes and trying to sense whether he could resonate with any of the blades. However, to his disappointment, after circling the warehouse 3 times, he still hadn't felt any connection with a single Zanpakuto. Outside the warehouse door, the instructor also observed Kyoya's actions, and the hope in his eyes gradually faded. It made sense. After all, for a Shinigami, the most important attribute was Reiatsu. With insufficient Reiatsu, the speed of mastering Zanzen would naturally be much slower. In some cases, many Shinigami didn't even possess enough Reiatsu to nurture the spirit within their Asauchi to the point where it could communicate with them. The ability to achieve Shikai was a clear dividing line in a Shinigami's combat strength. Setting aside the unique abilities granted by a Zanpakuto's Shikai, even the sheer boost in Reiatsu could create an overwhelming gap between opponents. Sigh, and quat. Kyoya shook his head. Failing to sense a Zanpakuto that resonated with him was still disappointing. It meant that Kyoya hadn't been acknowledged by any. However, fortunately, Kyoya hadn't pinned all his hopes on the Zanpakuto. So far, what had brought him the most significant improvements wasn't his training in the 4 fundamental Shinigami combat arts, but rather the achievement rewards from the One Piece achievement system. And quat. Should I just pick one randomly? And quat. Glancing at the Asochi around him, Kyoya muttered to himself and was about to reach for the nearest Asochi. Since he hadn't found an Asochi that resonated with him, any one of them would be the same to him. Just as Kyoya's hand was about to grasp the sword in front of him, his body suddenly froze. Wait a minute. Observation Haki can sense auras, right? Observation Haki was one of the 3 Haki in the One Piece world. While it didn't enhance offense or defense like armament Haki, nor could it intimidate enemies or deal real damage like Conqueror's Haki, that didn't mean Observation Haki was weak. In some ways, Observation Haki was even more important than armament Haki. When trained to its peak, Observation Haki could even allow the user to see into the future. Those with special talents could go further, listening to the voice of all things, reading minds, or even accessing memories. Figures like Queen Otoheim could even distort people's consciousness. Kyoya even speculated that if his Observation Haki possessed such abilities, he might be able to instantly release any Zanpakuto he picked up, regardless of its original owner. Of course, Kyoya's Observation Haki hadn't yet reached such an advanced stage. However, sensing the strength of the spirits within these Asochi should still be possible. With that in mind, a faint red light flickered in Kyoya's eye, expanded his Observation Haki. In the next moment, he felt countless auras of varying intensity around him. Most of the Asochi emitted weak auras, like flickering flames the size of a fingertip, so faint they could be extinguished with a single breath. A few stronger auras were slightly larger, about the size of a ping-pong ball, scattered sporadically throughout the warehouse. Among them, the most powerful aura was roughly the size of a fist. Moreover, compared to the other Asochi, this particular aura seemed unusually active. Outside the door, the 5th grade instructor had initially felt a twinge of disappointment when he saw Kyoya reaching for a random Asochi. But soon, he noticed that Kyoya seemed to sense something and began walking straight toward a specific direction. And quat. This is, and quat. Seeing this, the instructor's heart skipped a beat. And quat. Is a Zanpakuto calling out to Kyoya, and quat, or has Kyoya sensed in Asochi that resonates with him, and quat? If it was the former, it would mean Kyoya might become the new master of the strongest Zanpakuto, and reaching captain level, or even becoming one of the strongest among captains, would be no issue at all. If it was the latter, it would at least prove that Kyoya possessed the ability to fully nurture the spirit of a Zanpakuto, ensuring his future as at least a high-ranking seated officer, if not a lieutenant or higher. Click. As Kyoya reached out and took the Asochi from the shelf, a notification suddenly rang in his mind. However, since he heard the instructor's footsteps approaching from behind, Kyoya decided not to check what achievement he had unlocked just yet. After all, as long as the achievement system acknowledged accomplishments in the Bleach world, he could claim the reward. Though it was still unclear whether the Asochi that resonated with Kyoya was one of the famed strongest Zanpakuto or just an ordinary sword that required him to nurture its spirit. Either scenario meant that Kyoya's future far surpassed that of an average Shinigami. And quat. Now, let's return to the classroom. I'll teach you how to train in Zanzen, and quat. Yes, sensei, and quat. Unlike the lower grades, which focused On combat training, the most crucial task for 5th grade students at the Shino Academy was establishing a connection with their asauchi and using their own souls to nurture its spirit. Thus, most 5th grade students spent their time in the classroom practicing zanzen. Of course, not all students remained in the classroom. Those who had already established a connection with their asauchi's spirit and begun nurturing it could perform zanzen anywhere, so they didn't need to attend class regularly. Conversely, the students in the classroom were the ones struggling with their zanzen training. This way, if they encountered any difficulties, they could immediately seek guidance from the instructor. After returning to the classroom, Kyoya sat cross-legged like the other students, placing his asauchi horizontally across his lap. And quote, Kyoya, before learning zanzen, you must first achieve a state of complete focus, calm as still water, and quote, I believe you can do this, and quote. After all, every time you swing your sword, there's already a hint of this feeling in your movements, and quote. Kyoya nodded slightly. He understood what the instructor meant. Observation haki itself required the user to remain calm to function properly. If one's emotions were too turbulent, their observation. Chapter 13 Zanpakuto equals Devil Fruit. Kyoya's observation haki comes from the reward of the One Piece achievement system. Though Kyoya doesn't understand how the powers of the two worlds manifest in his body, the fact remains that he can use observation haki. Under such circumstances, whenever Kyoya employs observation haki, his state of mind naturally becomes as calm as still water. This means that when it comes to training in zanzen, Kyoya holds a significant advantage over other trainees due to the unique properties of his observation haki. And quote. Then, under these conditions, you need to use your perception to sense your asauchi, and quote. Once you can sense the spirit within the asauchi, you can move on to the next stage of training, and quote. However, this shouldn't be a problem for you, and quote. After all, when you selected your asauchi, you already established a connection with the spirit within it, and quote. Kyoya remained silent. What he had wasn't a connection with the spirit of the asauchi, he had simply relied on his observation haki's sensing ability to detect the spirits within the asauchi and chosen the one with the strongest spirit. However, observation haki is his own power. Using observation haki to connect with the spirit of the asauchi and using zanzen to connect with the spirit within the asauchi likely made little difference. After activating his observation haki, Kyoya began following the instructor's guidance to interact with the spirit within the asauchi, attempting to nurture it. However, contrary to Kyoya's expectations, the spirit within the asauchi showed no reaction whatsoever to his attempts. Kyoya can also understand this. The relationship between a shinigami and the spirit of an asauchi was akin to that of a simp and their unattainable crush. The shinigami was the simp, desperately trying to build a bond. Some shinigami were wealthy and powerful, those with immense ryoryoku, some were exceptionally gifted, those compatible with the strongest Zanpakuto, and some were incredibly persistent, simping till the end, eventually winning over their crush and paving the way for further interaction. This particular asauchi had no resonance with Kyoya, as it was essentially a forced bride he had taken by sheer force. Under such circumstances, it was no surprise that the spirit within the asauchi remained cold and unresponsive. During their first encounter, after trying for a while and seeing no change in the asauchi's spirit, Kyoya stopped focusing on it and instead turned his attention to the One Piece achievement system within his soul. When he had selected the asauchi, Kyoya had heard a ding sound, indicating that he had unintentionally completed an achievement by obtaining it. However, the situation at the time hadn't allowed him to divert his attention to check which achievement he had unlocked. Now was the perfect time to do so. Congratulations, host, for obtaining a devil fruit. Will you use the devil fruit? Using it will grant the gold tier achievement, devil fruit user. Wait, this isn't an achievement notification. It's a prompt about obtaining a devil fruit. Seeing this message, Kyoya found it both unexpected and yet reasonable. In the Bleach world, Zanpakuto possessed various mysterious and powerful abilities. Moreover, each Zanpakuto had only one master. The same was true in the One Piece world. Devil fruits granted unique abilities, and each devil fruit would only reappear somewhere in the world after its user died. In Bleach world, there was the Enrakioten capable of replicating other Zanpakuto's abilities, while in One Piece, the Yami Yami no Mi allowed its user to steal the powers of other devil fruit users. Since Kyoya had obtained an Asauchi, the One Piece achievement system likely interpreted it as him acquiring a devil fruit. Obtaining a devil fruit didn't count as an achievement. Using it did. However, after consuming the devil fruit, becoming a devil fruit user can be considered a gold tier achievement. Devil fruit abilities are powerful skills comparable to haki. In fact, for most people in the One Piece world, the boost in strength from a devil fruit surpasses what haki training can provide. The only question was whether Kyoya, after consuming the devil fruit and becoming a devil fruit user, would still be weakened by sea stone and seawater. But regardless, for Kyoya at this moment, the benefits far outweighed the drawbacks. Without hesitation, Kyoya confirmed in his mind. And quote, use it, and quote, following Kyoya's thoughts, golden light surged from the One Piece achievement system, flowing through his soul and merging into the Zanpakuto resting across his knees. Through his observation haki, Kyoya sensed the spirit within the Asauchi rapidly growing as it absorbed these golden particles. In just a few seconds, the spirit's intensity expanded from a fist-sized flame of soul energy to the size of a basketball, then further swelled to the size of a water vat. The Ryoryoku contained within this spirit, as sensed by Kyoya's observation haki, even surpassed his own by several times. Right now, Kyoya already possessed 8th class Ryoryoku. Even if he joined the Gotei 13, he would be considered an elite soldier. If the Ryoryoku of the Asauchi's spirit was several times greater than my own, that meant it was at least 6th class Ryoryoku. No wonder Shinigami who successfully released their Zanpakuto clearly, to nurture the spirit within the Asauchi to a level where it could communicate, gain the Zanpakuto's recognition, and achieve Shikai. A Shinigami's own Ryoryoku needed to reach at least 6th class Ryoryoku. Those below 6th class Ryoryoku would never be able to nurture the Asauchi's spirit to that level. But now, thanks to the One Piece achievement system, Kyoya had instantly completed the nurturing process for the spirit within his Asauchi. At this point, all Kyoya needed to do was communicate with the spirit inside his Zanpakuto, learn its name, and he would achieve Shikai. However, when Kyoya swept his observation haki over it, he suddenly realized that, though the spirit within his Asauchi had indeed been nurtured to the point of Shikai, under his observation haki's perception, it was nothing more than a vessel overflowing with spiritual pressure, devoid of any consciousness. It was as if the spirit inside the Asauchi was just an empty shell. Right then, another ding echoed in Kyoya's mind. Shifting his focus back to his soul, he saw a new golden orb floating within it. Faint words, devil fruit user, shimmered across its surface. Ding! Congratulations, host, for achieving the devil fruit user accomplishment. Would you like to claim the achievement reward? So, this is where the real deal begins. Kyoya smirked. Chapter 14 Inner World. Previously, Kyoya had obtained an Asauchi, which was equivalent to acquiring a devil fruit. Using it meant consuming the devil fruit and becoming a devil fruit user. However, The specific devil fruit ability had to be drawn from the One Piece achievement system. Well, that's just how the system works. Shaking his head inwardly, Kyoya didn't hesitate. This was the first gold tier achievement he had obtained after receiving the faction starter pack. From the faction starter pack, he had gotten the observation haki. Given that, the devil fruit ability he was about to draw this time should also be quite powerful. According to the rules of their two worlds, the spirit within the Asauchi he had previously chosen was the one with the strongest spiritual resonance among all the Asauchi he could sense. Correspondingly, in the judgment of the One Piece achievement system, the devil fruit ability he was about to obtain must undoubtedly be among the top tier ones. Claim the achievement reward. Following Kyoya's thoughts, the golden orb transformed into the shape of a fruit, shifting rapidly. Purple bananas, blue pineapples, orange apples, yellow bananas, pink twin fruits. Kyoya recognized some of these devil fruits, but most were versions he had never seen before. The ones he didn't recognize were hard to judge, but among those he did, every single one was a formidable devil fruit. Logia type, Goro Goro no Mi. Logia type, Mira Mira no Mi. Logia type, Pika Pika no Mi. Paramecia type, Bari Bari no Mi. Paramecia type, Gura. Paramecia type, Memo Memo no Mi. Zoan type, Ancient Zoan, Ryu Ryu no Mi. Model, Pteranodon. Zoan type, Mythical Zoan, Tori Tori no Mi. Model, Phoenix. Zoan type, Mythical Zoan, Hito Hito no Mi. Model, Daibutsu. The closer the orb got to the Asauchi, the faster it transformed. By the end, even Kyoya couldn't make out the shapes of the devil fruits anymore. Kyoya had a feeling that the moment the devil fruit ability merged with the spirit inside the Asauchi, whatever devil fruit appeared at that instant would determine the ability he obtained. BZZZ. At a certain moment, the golden light merged with the spirit within the Asauchi resting on Kyoya's lap. In an instant, under Kyoya's observation haki, the blue spirit that was hit by the light instantly turned into a blinding golden light. What ability is it? Kyoya raised his hands, trying to shield himself from the dazzling radiance. But unfortunately, the light erupted from within his very soul, so no matter how he crossed his arms in front of his face, he couldn't block out the brilliance. Ding! Congratulations, host. You have consumed a devil fruit and become a light human. Light human? Hearing the system's notification, Kyoya's heart surged with joy. Light human. This is the ability of the Logia type Pika Pika no Mi. In the One Piece world, the one who ate the Pika Pika no Mi and became a light human was none other than Admiral Kizaru Borsalino, one of the Marine's 3 admirals. As if sensing Kyoya's thoughts, the spirit within his Asauchi suddenly morphed into a man dressed in a yellow and white striped suit, draped in a Marine's justice cloak, with an unmistakably sleazy face. And quat, Kizaru Borsalino, and quat. The moment Kyoya uttered that name, he suddenly felt the environment around him underwent a drastic change. Blue skies, white clouds, lush greenery, and towering white structures. And on the walls, the unmistakable seagull emblem. And quat. This is Marine Headquarters, Marineford, and quat. After taking a quick look around, Kyoya immediately realized this was the Marine Headquarters in the One Piece world. Wait, wasn't I in the Bleach world? How had I suddenly ended up at Marineford in the One Piece world? However, Kyoya quickly understood. And quat. This must be the inner world connecting me to my Zanpakuto. If this were the real Marineford, it would be guarded by tens of thousands of Marines at all times. But right now, aside from myself, the place was completely deserted, and quat. No, that wasn't entirely accurate. Kyoya looked up and saw a man wearing a Marine's justice cloak sitting on a stone chair on the steps behind the execution platform of Marineford. Swish! Under Kyoya's gaze, the figure emitted a golden glow. In the next instant, a lazy and somewhat punchable voice sounded from behind Kyoya. And quat, yeah, I wasn't even planning to tell you my name yet, and you've already said it. Now that's really troublesome, and quat. Kyoya immediately turned around and saw Kizaru Borsalino, materialized from golden light. And quat, so it really is you, and quat, Kyoya exclaimed in surprise. From Borsalino's tone, Kyoya could tell that this spirit born from his Zanpakuto likely carried the memories of the Marine Admiral from his own recollections. In the One Piece world, devil fruits were miracles born from human imagination, each containing the will of the devil. This will of the devil was essentially the collective expectations and fantasies people held about that power to awaken a devil fruit's full potential. Its user needed a will strong enough to withstand and completely master this collective will. In the Bleach world, devil fruit's abilities had transformed into Zanpakuto's abilities, and the will of the devil had become the spirit of the Zanpakuto. However, Kyoya never expected that this spirit would be none other than Borsalino himself. And quat, what an interesting world, tilde and quat. Borsalino's yellow-tinted glasses gleamed with a flash of white light. And quat, Zanpakuto, born from the soul of a Shinigami, sharing their birth and their demise. I thought I could slack off for a while, but before I even got to rest, you went and called my name, tilde and quat. In the Bleach world, power stemmed from the soul, and a name was the manifestation of that soul. In other words, in the Bleach world, names were power itself. A Shinigami's Zanpakuto was the purest embodiment of this rule. By communing with their Zanpakuto and learning its true name, a Shinigami could call upon its power. By invoking that name, Kyoya's current Riryoku was only at the 8th class. To achieve even the initial Shikai of a Zanpakuto, one needed at least 6th class Riryoku. Originally, Borsalino had assumed it would take Kyoya 5, maybe even 10 years to grow strong enough to release his Zanpakuto. After all, with Kyoya's current level of Riryoku, even if Borsalino. Chapter 15 Partial Shikai. And quat, so, I've basically stumbled upon a bug, huh? And quat, Kyoya shook his head. Perhaps, for him, as long as his Zanpakuto in this Bleach world was one of those he was familiar with, this bug would inevitably activate. However, Kyoya was clearly not fortunate enough to resonate with any of the Zanpakuto bearing the title of strongest. Of course, Kyoya was also relieved that the ability he had drawn from the devil fruit user achievement happened to be one he recognized. Otherwise, like other Shinigami, he might have had to spend a long time buttering up his Zanpakuto's spirit before learning its true name and achieving Shikai. And quat, can I use the power of Shikai right now? And quat, ma, didn't I already say it? With your current Riryoku, you can't fully wield my power. And quat, Shinigami and Zanpakuto are two sides of the same existence. The Shikai of a Zanpakuto is essentially the fusion of the Shinigami's soul with the Zanpakuto's spirit, thereby enhancing their spiritual pressure and granting access to the Zanpakuto's abilities. Since this is a fusion, the Shinigami's spiritual pressure must naturally take the dominant role. But as things stood, Kyoya's Riryoku was nowhere near sufficient to bear the weight of Borsalino's Riryoku. And quat, don't tell me you don't know what a partial Shikai is. And quat, hearing Borsalino's words, Kyoya smiled and said, and quat, as my Zanpakuto, you should have my memories. And quat, not to mention partial Shikai, there's even partial Bankai. Ayasagawa Yumichika's Fuji Kujaku was a partial Shikai achieved by deliberately misnaming his Zanpakuto to provoke it. Abarai Renji's, Hihio Zabimaru, and Hitsugaya Toshiro's, Maru, were both incomplete bankai, also referred to as partial bankai, Renji Zanpakuto, Zabimaru, according to Ichibei Hayasubi, had intentionally given him the wrong name. But Kyoya strongly suspected that Ichibei had used his own Zanpakuto, Ikemonji, to alter Zabimaru's name. As for Toshiro, his situation was similar to Kyoya's. His own power was insufficient to fully manifest his Zanpakuto's abilities, so the Zanpakuto adapted to its wielder, resulting in a special mode. Of course, precisely because Maru was so overwhelmingly powerful, even an incomplete bankai allowed Hitsugaya to rival the strength of other captains. And quote, "If you want to slack off, I don't mind. And I can promise you that, unless absolutely necessary, I won't casually call your name. But the moment I do, you must lend me your power." And quote, yeah, and quote. The first conversation between Kyoya and his Zanpakuto ended with both sides getting what they wanted. Kyoya gained partial access to the powers of the Pika Pika no Mi, while Borsalino secured the leisure he desired. Of course, Kyoya was well aware that his relationship with Borsalino wouldn't remain like this forever. Well, more accurately, Borsalino probably hoped it would stay this way, while Kyoya intended to nullify this agreement once his strength reached a certain level. After all, for a Shinigami to train for Bankai, the Zanpakuto must submit completely, becoming nothing more than a steed, to amplify the Shinigami's combat power. To put it more vividly, the relationship between a Shinigami and their Zanpakuto during the Shikai stage is one of friendly cooperation. When a Shinigami wishes to wield their Zanpakuto's power, they call out its name, asking the Zanpakuto to lend them its strength. However, a Shinigami's Bankai is about fully integrating Zanpakuto, making its power a true part of their own. Shinigami who have already completed Bankai training can perform Shikai without even calling their Zanpakuto's name. They can directly summon and merge its power with their own to achieve Shikai. Borsalino may seem lazy, as if he only wants to be a slacker, collecting a paycheck. But in reality, as one of the Marine's top combatants, Borsalino naturally carries his own pride. In the past, after Whitebeard's era came to an end, when Kaido and Big Mom showed signs of allying, Borsalino even volunteered to Fleet Admiral Akainu to intercept Kaido. While the general consensus is that admirals and emperors are on the same level, the four emperors' feats tend to outshine those of the admirals. As a salary-stealing slacker, you can call Borsalino lazy, but you can't call him weak. If Kyoya were to try and forcibly subjugate Borsalino, unless Kyoya demonstrated absolute strength and defeated Borsalino, earning his recognition, it would be impossible. Otherwise, simply knowing Kizaru Borsalino's name would never be enough to make him Kyoya's steed and enhance his power, allowing Kyoya to complete his Bankai training. And genius. As expected, I wasn't mistaken. And after the spirit within Kyoya's Asochi was fully nurtured by the devil fruit of the One Piece achievement system, the instructor teaching him Zanzen was overjoyed. Zanzen can be faked. However, the fluctuations in Reiatsu when a Shinigami first communicates with their Zanpakuto cannot be faked. And the fact that Kyoya managed to communicate with the spirit inside his Asochi during his very first Zanzen proves that his Zanpakuto undoubtedly belongs to one of the strongest in existence. Unfortunately, Kyoya's Reiryoku is still too weak right now. And he communicates with the spirit inside his Zanpakuto. He won't be able to clearly hear its name. And otherwise, we could determine exactly which Zanpakuto has manifested by its name. And according to the records left by the Sairete, there are only a handful of Zanpakuto known as the strongest in their respective categories. The strongest fire-type Zanpakuto, Ryujin Jaka. The strongest lightning-type Zanpakuto, Gonryomaru. The strongest ice-type Zanpakuto, Hyarin Maru. The most beautiful Zanpakuto, Sode no Shirayuki. The strongest living-type Zanpakuto, Gagaku Kairo. Among these, Ryujin Jaka is the Zanpakuto manifested by Captain Commander Yamamoto and has always remained in his possession. Gonryomaru belongs to Chojiro Sasakibi, the lieutenant of the 1st Division, and is already claimed. Gagaku Kairo was the Zanpakuto of the 8th Kenpachi, Kuruyashiki Kenpachi, and has been dormant since his death at the hands of the 8th Kenpachi, Azashiro Soya. The wielder of Hyarin Maru has been dead for centuries. This means Kyoya's Zanpakuto could be one of Sode no Shirayuki, Hyarin Maru, or Urozakuro. Of course, the instructor is aware that the records in the Shino Academy are not exhaustive. Kyoya's Zanpakuto could also be an unrecorded, strongest Zanpakuto in another category. But no matter what, a Shinigami who possesses one of the strongest Zanpakuto will undoubtedly grow into a formidable figure among the captain level once they reach their full potential. Chapter 16 6th grade and Quat, Kyoya, how was it? And Quat, Kyoya opened his eyes to see his instructor bending down, eagerly asking him, and Quat, sensei, and Quat, I was quite lucky. I managed to establish a good connection with it, and Quat, Kyoya stood up and sheathed his Zanpakuto at his waist. Indeed, from Kyoya's perspective, his luck had been exceptionally good. Though in the later stages of the One Piece world, mythical Zoan-type devil fruits were considered the meta, the prestige of Logia types never faded from beginning to end. The Pika Pika no Mi is the pinnacle of speed in their One Piece world. Speed is weight, was Borsalino's catchphrase. With a casual, how terrifying, he could knock out a supernova in a single kick. Even the Goro Goro no Mi, hailed as the strongest Logia, fell slightly short of the Pika Pika no Mi in terms of speed. In other words, aside from stamina, where it couldn't compete with the endless resilience of mythical Zoans, the Pika Pika no Mi excelled in every aspect, standing at the very top. Being able to obtain an ability like their Pika Pika no Mi from the devil fruit user, achievement truly delighted Kyoya. And Quat, good. Since you've already established a connection with your Zanpakuto, you no longer need to attend the 5th grade Zanzan training sessions. And Quat, hearing these words from the instructor, the students of Class 5A couldn't help but look at Kyoya with envy. This was what it meant to be a genius. No matter how many years they had spent at the Shino Academy before Kyoya arrived, what did it matter? In just half a day, no, merely 2 hours, Kyoya had completely. Among their class of several dozen, there were some whose Riryoku had reached the 8th class. But to say they could ever achieve what Kyoya had would be nothing but self-deception. Kyoya was like the idealized version of themselves they had once fantasized about. But alas, fantasies remained just that. Fantasies. The reality was that the genius was Kyoya. They probably didn't even qualify to be supporting characters in his story. Perhaps the only thing they could boast about to their friends over drinks was that they had once been classmates with Kyoya for 2 hours and witnessed him establishing a connection with his Asochi. And Quat, if you wish to advance to the 6th grade, I can issue you the certification immediately. And Quat, hiss, and Quat. The students collectively gasped at the instructor's words. After all, before today, some instructors and students at Shino Academy had been speculating whether Kyoya could surpass the record set by Jin the previous year. But now, seeing that Kyoya had taken less than 2 hours to connect with the spirit of his Asochi and complete the 5th grade year training, the students were stunned. However, They didn't fully understand the instructor's suggestion. Logically speaking, even after establishing a connection with the spirit within the Asochi, students needed time to nurture that spirit and forge the Asochi into their own unique Zanpakuto. Though Kyoya had already connected with his Asochi, the instructor wasn't advising him to stay in the 5th grade to nurture it into a Zanpakuto. Instead, he was offering to certify Kyoya's completion of the course immediately, allowing him to advance to the 6th grade. They wondered if the instructor was trying to push Kyoya to break. They wondered if the instructor was trying to push Kyoya to break Jin's record. As for what would Kyoya choose, they felt that he would probably refuse. After all, 6th grade students were those who had completed all their studies at Shino Academy, essentially and quat, provisional Shinigami, and quat. The 6th grade curriculum consisted entirely of combat training. They fought experimental hollows, and their final exam involved battling real hollows. Therefore, to further strengthen himself, Kyoya should decline and spend more time in the 5th grade, shouldn't he? And quat. Okay, and quat. 2. Everyone's surprise, Kyoya didn't hesitate at all in response to the instructor's suggestion. He nodded immediately and said, and quat. Then I'll trouble you, sensei, and quat. The teacher's proposal aligned perfectly with Kyoya's own intentions. His Asochi, under the influence of the One Piece achievement system, had already transformed into a Zanpakuto. And, if nothing unexpected happens, it is also the strongest light-type Zanpakuto. Moreover, Kyoya could already perform a partial Shikai. Staying in the 5th grade would offer him no benefit beyond slowly accumulating Riryoku. Over time, for Kyoya, the most efficient way to rapidly increase his Riryoku was to complete more system achievements. The rewards from the system didn't just include skills, they also granted the Riryoku growth equivalent to the time spent training. For example, the Marine Rookie achievement Kyoya had obtained last time didn't just elevate him to the level of a great swordsman. It had also boosted his Riryoku to 8th class. In just 1 year, Kyoya had advanced 2 full ranks. Though higher classes of Riryoku became increasingly difficult to break through, if Kyoya were to spend the full 6 years at the academy, it would only be a waste of his time. Though higher classes of Riryoku became increasingly difficult to break through, if Kyoya were to spend the full 6 years at Shino Academy, his Riryoku would at least reach the 6th class, enough to meet the requirements for complete Shikai. But that would be the stupidest choice. Kyoya's innate talent as a Shinigami was merely average. Without the One Piece achievement system, his limit would likely be lieutenant at best. In fact, he might never even reach the 4th class Riryoku in his lifetime, remaining just a decently strong seated officer. The reason he had come this far was almost entirely due to the One Piece achievement system, accounting for at least 95% of his progress. Only by graduating as soon as possible, completing more achievements, and claiming more achievement rewards can Kyoya become stronger. Half a day later, Kyoya once again found himself in the head instructor's office. As Kyoya expected, when the dean saw the application in Kyoya's hands, his expression wasn't just shocked, it was tinged with awe. It can't be helped. If the 5th grade instructor knew about Kyoya's situation, the head instructor certainly did as well. After approving the application, the head instructor immediately reported Kyoya's case to higher authorities. As a training institution under the Gotei 13, Shino Academy had a duty to report prodigies to the Gotei 13. If a division took an interest in a particular student, they would approach them before graduation and attempt to recruit them. Generally speaking, once a division made an offer, others would refrain from interfering. But if the student was exceptionally talented, it wasn't unheard of for multiple divisions to compete for them. Of course, if a student wasn't satisfied with the Division. Chapter 17 Assessment. But if one's strength is insufficient, no matter where you go, bullying of the weak exists. In the Gotei 13's divisions, the bullying faced by the weak is far more severe than in the Shino Academy. In the academy, while bullying does occur, this is ultimately a place for training Shinigami, and the instructors won't allow the students to go too far. But in the divisions, because battles can break out at any moment, and battles can lead to deaths, the lower-ranked Shinigami inevitably need some way to vent their pent-up stress. Under such circumstances, even if seated officers, lieutenants, or even captains are aware of bullying within their divisions, as long as it doesn't happen right in front of them, they'll almost always turn a blind eye. In fact, some seated officers might even be the ones leading the bullying. Kyoya remembered that, in the future, there was a Shinigami from the 9th Division who was bullied and forced to transfer divisions, eventually becoming a villainous boss who caused significant damage to the Seirete. Most students would try to prolong their time at the Shino Academy as much as possible. Take, for example, the future 9th Division's Lieutenant, Hisagi Shuhei. After skipping ahead to the 6th year, he participated in multiple graduation exams. Even after passing, he felt his strength was still lacking and chose not to graduate. Shaking his head, the head instructor watched Kyoya's retreating figure and suppressed his thoughts. Forget staying a few more years. With Kyoya's current zanjutsu, even if he graduated right now, his strength within a division would likely only be second to that of a seated officer. If Kyoya is given 1 or 2 years, becoming a seated officer in a division will not be a problem. Within a decade, Kyoya would surely possess the strength of a high-ranking seated officer. And quote, "Your Kyoya," and quote. The 6th grade instructor took Kyoya's application and scrutinized him. And quote, "If I remember correctly, you were still a 4th grade student yesterday, and quote, even if you're skipping a grade, it should be to the 5th grade, and quote." As he spoke, the instructor's gaze lingered on the zanpakuto at Kyoya's waist. 5th-year students were required to perform zanzen to establish a connection with the spirit within their asauchi, using their own soul to nurture the spirit of the asauchi and forge it into their zanpakuto. Now that Kyoya was here, already carrying an asauchi, there were only 2 possible explanations. First, Kyoya wasn't just a genius in swordsmanship, he was also a prodigy in zanzen. In less than half a day, he had mastered the meditation technique and successfully connected with his asauchi. Thus, staying in the 5th grade would be pointless for him. Second, Kyoya hadn't practiced zanzen at all, abandoning the path of the zanpakuto to focus solely on swordsmanship, aiming to reach the pinnacle of the zanjutsu. After all, before zanpakuto existed, the mainstream in the Seirete was the practice of zanjutsu and kido. Even after zanpakuto emerged and Shinigami gained greater power, zanjutsu remained an indispensable part of a Shinigami's 4 fundamental skills. And quote, "Never mind," and quote, shaking his head, the instructor didn't press Kyoya for answers. After all, he was just an instructor at the Shino Academy. His duty here was to oversee students during combat training, ensuring they didn't suffer fatal injuries. As for the rest, a single grades class could have as few as 170 to 180 students or as many as over 200. Of these, fewer than 30 would join the Gotei 13 each year. The rest would all be assigned to the expeditionary force in Hueco Mundo. Over the decades, he had sent off countless students. At first, he would grieve for these students embarking on a path of death. But as time passed, his heart grew numb. Even if someone was killed by an experimental hollow during training, his eyebrows wouldn't so much as twitch. After all, if a 6th grade student couldn't even defeat an experimental hollow, then whether they joined the Gotei 13 or were assigned to the Hueco Mundo Expeditionary force, death was inevitable. And quat, follow me, and quat, I'll conduct an assessment for you, then assign you to a class based on your results. And quat. Let me make this clear. The training for 6th grade isn't as gentle as in the other grades. And quat. In the lower years, failing an assessment rarely leads to serious injury, let alone life-threatening danger. And quat. But for 6th grades, failing an assessment could mean death. And quat. If you're not afraid to die, I'll arrange your assessment right now. And quat. But if you're scared, I can place you in class 6D and let you take the assessment with them next time. And quat. What do you say? And quat. Class 6D was the weakest among the 6th grade classes. Weak in terms of strength. Over the centuries, students from class 6C occasionally got lucky, passed the graduation exam, and successfully joined the Gotei 13. But not a single student from class 6D had ever made it. And quat. I'm willing to take the assessment, sensei. And quat. Kyoya placed his hand on the zanpakuto at his waist and spoke solemnly. And quat. A Shinigami is someone who entrusts their life to their blade. If I feared battle, I wouldn't have come to the Shino Academy to train as a Shinigami in the first place. And quat. Good. Regardless of anything else, I like your courage, kid. And quat. Let's see if you can keep that attitude going. And quat. We're here. And quat. Kyoya looked up and saw a massive white hemispherical building nearly 100 meters in diameter ahead. Rumble. As the 6th grade instructor operated the controls, the heavy gate slid open, revealing a square passageway. And quat. Go on in. And quat. Understood. And quat. Kyoya stepped past the instructor and entered the passage. As he walked through, his vision was filled with white. The interior of the structure resembled a coliseum. At the very center, the lowest point, was a circular grassy field. Surrounding it were tiered seating arranged like steps. At the moment, a sparse handful of people stood among the seats. Beside them, the instructor who had brought Kyoya was speaking to the others. Are they researchers from the 12th Division? Kyoya only needed one glance at the white lab coats they wore to guess their identities. The experimental hollows used for 6th grade training weren't real hollows. They were artificial constructs developed by the 12th Division's Research and Development Institute, based on artificial soul, compared to real hollows. Although these experimental hollows had the same form, their strength was much weaker than real hollows. Chapter 18 Instant Kill. As researchers, they naturally want their experimental hollows to be as close to real hollows as possible. Therefore, every time the 6th grade students battle the experimental hollows, researchers are present to record data. And quat. Assessment, begin. And quat. Kyoya's ears suddenly caught the voice of the 12th Division's researchers standing on the steps. As the command was given, a door on the opposite side of where Kyoya stood slid open. And quat. Gruel and quat. A terrifying growl echoed from the passage. Thud, 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 thud. After the growl faded, the sound of something rapidly charging forward followed. Soon, a green-skinned hollow, about the size of a calf and wearing a white bone-like mask, appeared before Kyoya. And quat, grr, and quat. Upon spotting Kyoya, the experimental hollow adjusted its direction slightly and charged straight at him. Swish. Kyoya drew his zanpakuto from his waist, his reiatsu erupting beneath his feet as he activated Shunpo, instantly appearing in front of the hollow with a single slash of his blade. Schlick. Kyoya's zanpakuto cut through the hollow as effortlessly as if it were slicing through cloth, cleaving the experimental hollow cleanly in half. Crimson blood sprayed from the hollow's bisected body, but just before it could touch Kyoya, both the blood and The hollows remains dissipated into white spiritual particles. Though this was Kyoya's first real battle, the difference between them was far too vast. The Shinigami of the Gotei 13 all possess at least 10th class Riryoku and have a certain level of mastery in Zanjutsu, Ho-Ho, Kido, and Hakuda. This standard wasn't arbitrarily set by the Gotei 13. The hollows in Hueco Mundo, as well as those that manifest in the human world, all possess 10th class Riryoku. Only Shinigami with equivalent Riryoku and sufficient skill in the 4 combat arts can successfully purify hollows and maintain the balance of the world. Otherwise, Shinigami who lack the necessary strength, no matter how many there are, would not only fail to purify the hollows but might even end up as mere deliverymen, offering themselves up as meals to the hollows and making them stronger, thereby increasing the difficulty for others to purify them later. After all, for hollows, Shinigami with strong Riryoku are their most delectable prey. Moreover, due to the nature of hollows, which is to devour souls to grow stronger, once a hollow consumes enough powerful souls, it undergoes an evolution. Lesser hollows have Riryoku between 10th and 8th class. Medium hollows range from 8th to 6th class. Jillian class Menos is far stronger than medium hollows, possessing 4th class Riryoku. However, due to their lack of consciousness, massive size, and limited attack methods, high-ranking officers can usually defeat them. Ajucha's class Menos possess 3rd class Riryoku, which is equivalent to the captains of the Gotei 13. The highest class, Vasto Lord class Menos, have Riryoku of 2nd class or above. The experimental hollows used for training in the Shino Academy lack both the obsessions that fuel real hollows and the ability to grow stronger by devouring souls. Their Riryoku is roughly around 15th class. For most 6th grade students, these experimental hollows are decent training opponents. Ruakuas's Riryoku had already reached 8th class. However, Kyoya's Riryoku had already reached 8th class. Even within the Gotei 13, those with 8th class Riryoku are considered elite Shinigami level. Such a massive gap in strength made this experimental hollow no different from a newborn baby in front of Kyoya. And quat, Gruel and quat. And quat, Gruel and quat, and quat, Gruel and quat. 3 consecutive hollow cries let Kyoya know that this assessment wasn't over yet. Sure enough, within moments, 3 more identical experimental hollows emerged from the passage, charging toward Kyoya. And quat, too weak, and quat, after sensing the Reiatsu of these 3 experimental hollows and observing their movements, Kyoya couldn't help but feel disappointed. Kyoya had fantasized about his first real battle many times over the past while. At first, Kyoya thought he might be the type who enjoyed overwhelming weaker opponents. After all, who doesn't want to be invincible? Who doesn't want to be undefeated? Cutting down swaths of enemies like an unstoppable force. What grandeur! But now, it seemed that what Kyoya truly desired was a battle against an evenly matched opponent. When he actually fought these experimental hollows, he realized just how weak they were, so weak that he couldn't even muster the will to lift his sword. There wasn't even the slightest spark of fighting spirit. Shaking his head, Kyoya raised his Zanpakuto and swung it fiercely toward the 3 experimental hollows. Swish, as Kyoya's Zanpakuto descended, a white arc of energy over 3 meters wide tore through the air, bisecting all 3 experimental hollows in an instant before slamming into the Colosseum's wall. Boom! Dust and debris exploded outward. When the smoke cleared, a 1-meter deep gash had been carved into the wall. And quat, Sensei, I have no interest in fighting these things. And quat, if the rest of the opponents are all like this, then please release them all at once. And quat, this, and quat. Hearing Kyoya's words, The 6th grade instructor hesitated and glanced at the researchers beside him. These experimental hollows were all products of the 12th Division's Research and Development Institute. From the moment they were created, these experimental hollows were destined to be nothing more than expendable test subjects. But judging by Kyoya's performance, these hollows couldn't even begin to measure his true strength. The 6th grade assessment was simple: killing in experimental hollow would be considered passing the assessment, and the student would not be expelled and would be admitted to Class D. Killing 3 experimental hollows is a good result, and they can be assigned to Class C. Kill 6 experimental hollows and they will be assigned to Class B. Those who kill more than 10 experimental hollows can be assigned to Class A. Originally, the instructor had assumed that Kyoya, having skipped 5th grade entirely and lacking real combat experience, would at best manage to kill 5 hollows and hold out for a while against 10. That would have been enough to place him in Class 6B. However, he never imagined Kyoya would be this terrify. Forget 10. Even if they summoned the captain of the Research and Development Institute and got approval to release all the experimental hollows stored in this arena, it would only mean Kyoya swinging his sword a few more times. His ability to unleash Kanatsu through sheer Zanjutsu alone was already beyond standard for this level. TN Kanatsu means sword pressure. It's an ability similar to flying slash in One Piece world. In fact, even some of the Shino Academy instructors had to admit that, without releasing their Zanpakuto, they might not stand a chance against Kyoya as he was now. And even with Shikai, their odds of victory were slim. So, they follow Kyoya's request and release the remaining 15 experimental hollows all at once, or should they simply end the assessment and declare him pass outright? And quote, Moriyama-san, what do you think? And quote, the researcher called Moriyama stroked his chin, glanced at the damaged walls of the arena, and shook his head. And quote, forget it, and quote, given this student's strength, sending out more experimental hollows would be meaningless. It would just be a waste, and quote, while it's true that producing experimental hollows isn't difficult for us, and quote, scientific research must avoid wastefulness, and quote, that's enough. Let's end it here, and quote, understood. I'll take him with me, then, and quote, rumble. Kyoya didn't hear what his instructor and the researchers had discussed, but when he saw his instructor gesture for him to leave and the exit open, he knew the assessment was over. Sheathing his Zanpakuto, Kyoya stepped out of the Aron, and quote, well done, Kyoya, and quote, your strength is more than enough to place you in Class 6A, and quote, come with me. I'll introduce you to your classmates, and quote. Kyoya remained silent, simply following his teacher. It wasn't that he had any issue with the instructor, rather, the moment he left the arena, another ding echoed in his mind. Kyoya was curious about what achievement he had unlocked this time, so he diverted part of his focus to his consciousness to check. As a result, he barely registered the instructor's words. However, Kyoya's demeanor led the instructor to misunderstand. At that moment, the instructor said in a deep voice, and quote, Kyoya, I know you're strong. Exceptionally strong, and quote. In fact, I dare say there isn't a single student in the entire Shino Academy right now who can match you, and quote. But you must understand. Once you graduate and join the Gotei 13, the dangers you'll face will be far beyond those of the defective hollows you fought in the exam, and quote. Real hollows are far more terrifying than experimental ones, and quote. Not just in strength, but in cunning as well, and quote. Some hollows, twisted by their own corrupted obsessions, act with extreme cruelty. They set traps to lure Shinigami into ambushes, and quat. In situations like those, your comrades are the ones who'll have your back when you're in danger, and quat, and your classmates at Shino Academy will be your most reliable allies in the future, and quat. I understand, sensei, and quat. Distracted by the teacher's lecture, Kyoya didn't bother checking his new achievement and instead gave a perfunctory reply. The instructor's advice might have been invaluable to others, a veteran Shinigami's decades, if not centuries, of experience. Whether joining the Gotei 13 or being assigned to the Huko Mundo Expeditionary Force, trusted comrades were essential for survival. But to Kyoya, none of this mattered. Only the weak gather in numbers, the strong walk alone. Kyoya's ambitions stretched far beyond just becoming a captain. Besides, he didn't plan on staying in the 6th grade for long. 10 days, a month. At most, he'd leave Shino Academy after the next graduation exam. In less than 3 months, unless he genuinely bonded with them, how deep could any superficial friendships go? And quat, very well, and quat. Hearing Kyoya's response, the instructor realized his words hadn't gotten through. There was nothing more he could do about this. He could only hope the other students in the class would adjust their attitudes and sincerely try to connect with Kyoya. After all, in the future, they might need Kyoya's protection, not the other way around. Chapter 19 Ikimaru Jin. Upon entering the classroom, after having Kyoya introduce himself, their 6th year instructor said to him, and quat, the 6th grade training mainly relies on your own efforts, and quat. If you have any questions regarding your training, you can come to the classroom and ask the instructors directly, and quat. At this point, the instructor paused before continuing, and quat. Of course, if you don't have any issues with your training, you don't have to come to the classroom either, and quat. After all, the questions you might have are probably beyond my ability to answer, and quat. This wasn't the instructor being modest. It was what he genuinely believed. Kyoya's swordsmanship skills, capable of unleashing Kanatsu, far surpassed his own. In fact, if not for the constraints of their roles, he would have wanted to ask Kyoya for advice on Zanjutsu himself. And quat. However, you must come for the assessments when they're held, and quat. Understood, sensei, and quat. As the teacher had anticipated, after joining class 6A, Kyoya didn't interact much with his classmates. On one hand, Kyoya's reputation as a genius made the other students acutely aware of the gap between themselves and him. Though Kyoya had been enrolled in the Shino Academy for less than a year, his fame as a Zanjutsu prodigy had already spread throughout the entire institution. This was no exaggeration. He was the kind of talent who could unleash Kanatsu with nothing but basic Zanjutsu. Kanatsu was something the students only learned about after witnessing Kyoya's slashes and asking the instructors for an explanation. It wasn't that the teachers hadn't taught it. Rather, some of them didn't even know Kanatsu existed. Even among those who did, few had ever seen it in person. According to the Zanjutsu instructors at Shino Academy, to unleash Kanatsu, one needed either extraordinary mastery of Zanjutsu, a Zanpakuto with unique abilities, or captain-level Reiatsu. Of these, the first was the purest form of Kanatsu, while the latter two were more about brute force. That wasn't to say Kanatsu was necessarily stronger than slashes enhanced with Reiatsu. The strength of any ability depended on the user's skill. The greater one's mastery of Zanjutsu, the stronger their Kanatsu. Similarly, the stronger one's Reiatsu, the more powerful their spiritual pressure-enhanced slashes would be. Take Kurosaki Ichigo, for example. After regaining his Shinigami power, a casual slash of his Kanatsu was once mistaken by Ginjo Kugo as a Getsuga Tensho. This was partly due to Ichigo's considerable Zanjutsu mastery, but when Ichigo clarified, and quote, that wasn't Getsuga Tensho, just a Kanatsu, and quote, it became clear that his spiritual pressure was the greater factor. If one's swordsmanship was truly exceptional, their Kanatsu should surpass slashes enhanced purely with Reiatsu. Generally, geniuses had an air of arrogance about them, especially someone as prodigious as Kyoya. The other students still remembered Jin from the previous year. Kyoya was a genius on par with Jin, so they assumed his personality would be similar. They didn't want a repeat of last year's experience. On the other hand, Kyoya was deliberately keeping his distance. He had no interest in wasting time socializing with unfamiliar classmates, so whenever he sensed someone approaching him, he would subtly evade them, leaving no room for conversation. Kyoya attended classes for 3 consecutive days, confirming that the 6th-year curriculum had nothing to offer him, and afterward, he never returned to the classroom. Instead, he divided his time between the dormitory and training grounds. Under the moonlight, Kyoya's figure flickered across the training grounds, the reflections of his Zanpakuto weaving a dazzling web of white light. These flashes weren't from Kanatsu or Reiatsu, they were simply the moonlight glinting off his blade. Although Kyoya had already comprehended breadth of all things, and become a great swordsman capable of unleashing flying slashes, his current swordsmanship was still limited to the basic zanjutsu taught at the Shino Academy and the foundational swordsmanship from the Marine Training Base. Shinigami's zanjutsu emphasized power, while the swordsmanship of the One Piece world prioritized technique. If Kyoya wanted to merge the greatest aspects of both worlds' swordsmanship, he would have to train and integrate them himself. After all, the rewards from the One Piece achievement system were all things from the One Piece world, while concepts like breadth of all things could be universally applied, and devil fruit abilities had transformed into his Zanpakuto's powers, relying solely on the One Piece achievement system's rewards might allow Kyoya to reach a level comparable to Captain Commander Yamamoto. In the One Piece world, the 4 emperors and admirals were the top-tier fighters. Even the 5 elders belonged to this tier. Imyu, the god of the One Piece world, was likely on par with Yamamoto. However, in the Bleach world, Yamamoto was not the strongest. The leader of the Zero Division, Hyosube Ichibe, and the Quincy progenitor, Uwak, far surpassed Yamamoto in power. Ichibe was the one who named all things in Soul Society, and his Zanpakuto, Ikemonji, could rewrite names themselves. Uwak's strength was built upon the Quincy's, so the stronger they were, the more power would return to him upon their deaths. With the 1,000-year development of the Wandenreich and the absorption of the Soul King's heart, left arm, and Mimihagi, Uwak had become the being closest to the Soul King. For Kyoya to reach such heights, he would need to fuse the strengths of both worlds to break through the limits of his soul. Swordsmanship was the path he had chosen. If Kyoya could merge the technique of the One Piece world with the power of the Bleach world, his swordsmanship would undoubtedly transcend its limits and become his greatest weapon. And quote, and quote, Kyoya's movements came to an abrupt halt. His gaze shifted to a corner of the training grounds. And quote, Ara, what sharp senses you have, and quote, from the shadows, a figure of similar height to Kyoya emerged. The black Shihakusho told Kyoya that this person was a member of the Gotei 13. The short silver-white hair, the perpetually narrowed eyes, and the wide grin stretching nearly to his ears instantly revealed the visitor's identity. Kyoya had expected to meet Jin Ichimaru eventually, but he hadn't anticipated their first encounter to be now. And quote, Ichimaru Jin-senpai, and quote, oh, you know me, and quote, ha ha ha, and quote, Kyoya chuckled, and quote, The instructors at the academy often compare me to you. How could I not recognize you? And quote. Chapter 20 Kyoya vs. Jin. Kyoya's words weren't entirely a lie to Jin. When Kyoya began displaying his zanjutsu talent and rapidly advanced through the academy grades, people started comparing him to Jin. The more this was mentioned, even if Kyoya had initially known nothing about Jin, he would have inevitably learned some details about him through these discussions. And quote. But, senpai, didn't you already join the 5th division? Why are you back at the academy again? And quote. And quote. Ara. It's not like I wanted to come back. And quote. Jin scratched his head with an almost embarrassed expression. And quote. But how could I ignore the rumors of my genius junior that have even reached the divisions? So, Lieutenant Aizen asked me to conduct a test on you, junior. If you pass, he'll extend an invitation for you to join the 5th division. And quote. And quote. Aizen. And quote. Kyoya frowned. It was common for prodigies in the Shino Academy to draw the attention of the Gotei 13. If a division took interest, those with recruitment authority would extend invitations to bolster their ranks. Kyoya knew this. But what Kyoya hadn't expected was that the first to approach him would be Aizen. Originally, Kyoya had assumed that with the zanjutsu talent he displayed, even if Yamamoto himself didn't take notice, at least his 2 disciples, Kyoraku Shunsui and Yukitake Jushiro, might show some interest. Even Unohana Retsu from the 4th division might have taken an interest in his zanjutsu potential. After all, as far as Kyoya knew, the reason Unohana had down as captain of the 11th division to lead the 4th was her defeat against Zaraki Kenpachi in the Rukongai. The title, Kenpachi, was one Unohana had claimed for herself during her days as Yachiru, proclaiming herself the strongest Shinigami. This alone spoke volumes about how fiercely proud she had been. Even after losing to Yamamoto, she hadn't considered herself defeated in Zanjutsu, only by his Zanpakuto, Ryujin Jaka. But in that battle in the Rukongai, Unohana had suffered a crushing defeat. To match her, Zaraki had unconsciously suppressed his Reiatsu during their duel. That fight left both Unohana and Zaraki believing they had lost. Unohana felt she had failed to push her opponent to his limits, making her unworthy of the title Kenpachi. To prepare for their next battle, she turned to mastering Kaido to sustain longer combat endurance. Zaraki, unaware that he had unconsciously restrained his Reiatsu, simply remembered an exhilarating fight where he was ultimately defeated by Unohana. If Unohana believed Kyoya had the potential to become a future Kenpachi, she might have extended an olive branch. But as things stood, the one who showed the most interest in him was Aizen. Or perhaps it was Jin. Kyoya didn't believe for a second that the current Jin wouldn't have investigated his connection to Rangiku. And Rangiku was Jin's weakness. Given that Kyoya had once been associated with Rangiku, it was only natural for Jin to personally assess him, to judge his character and whether he posed any threat to Rangiku. If Kyoya proved harmless, or even beneficial, to Rangiku, Jin might leave him be. But if Kyoya was deemed a potential threat, Jin would eliminate him before he could grow stronger. And quote. So, how will this test work? And quote. And quote. Well, since we're Shinigami, and quote. And quote. It's only natural that we, and quote, fight, and quote. The last word seemed to whisper directly into Kyoya's ear. No, it wasn't just a sensation. It was in his ear. Jin's previous figure dissolved into an afterimage. Such incredible shunpo. Kyoya's heart raced. It must be known that, because of him, Jin had only entered the Shino Academy 1 year earlier than him and Rangiku. But with the level of shunpo currently demonstrated by Jin, even some instructors at the Shino Academy could not compare to him. Fortunately, Kyoya's wariness toward Jin, or rather, toward Aizen, was at its peak. The moment he sensed Jin's presence, he had already activated his observation haki. Thus, Jin's sudden attack didn't catch him entirely off guard. Clang! The sound of clashing blades rang out, sparks erupting between Kyoya and Jin. And quat, not bad, and quat, Jin remarked, his perpetually narrowed eyes cracking open just a sliver. Kyoya's reaction was as if he had seen through Jin's movements in advance, drawing his sword to block before Jin's Zanpakuto could strike. And quat, then, how about this? And quat. With that, Jin's Zanpakuto thrust forward in a rapid flurry, transforming into dozens of after images that enveloped Kyoya. Swish, swish, swish. Clang, clang, clang. Kyoya gripped his sword with both hands, desperately parrying Jin's attacks. However, even with Kenbun Shoku Haki allowing him to sense Jin's movements and react in advance, Kyoya was still forced to. The difference in their attack speed was simply too vast. Jin's Zanpakuto, Shinso, can be said to be the Zanpakuto with the fastest attack speed in Soul Society. Even though he has not released his Zanpakuto, Jin, who was able to wield Shinso, had the characteristic of extreme speed in himself. Out of every 10 strikes Jin unleashed, Kyoya could block at most 6 or 7, the rest forced him to dodge or retreat. He's too strong. Kyoya gritted his teeth as he stepped back, his mind racing. While Jin had indeed entered the Shino Academy a year earlier than himself, and joined the 5th Division more than half a year earlier, the achievements completed by Kyoya had also given him the results of 1 year and 1 month of training. By that calculation, Kyoya had actually trained longer than Jin by a month. And yet, in a pure Zanjutsu duel, he was still at a disadvantage. No, this wasn't just a disadvantage. Kyoya was currently using observation haki, and even then, he was barely managing to defend against Jin's attacks. If Kyoya hadn't been using his observation haki, he doubted he could survive more than a few slashes. Frustration. That was the first emotion Kyoya felt. As a swordsman who had comprehended breadth of all things, his strikes carried not only the sharpness to cut steel but also the ability to send flying slashes by riding the breadth of the world. However, in this battle against Jin, neither of these advantages could be utilized. Chapter 21 Shoot to Kill, Shinso. The sword in Jin Ichimaru's hand was no ordinary sword, it was a Zanpakuto forged by the god of the swords, Nimaya Utsu. Even in its sealed state as in a Sochi, it was no less formidable than a skillful grade blade in the One Piece world. Kuchiki. Byakuya once said that a Shinigami's Zanpakuto represents the ultimate compression of their Riryoku. Without this compression, a Shinigami's Reiatsu would manifest as an enormous, unwieldy blade of pure energy. Similarly, Kenpachi stated that the edge of a Zanpakuto is the focal point of a Shinigami's strongest Reiatsu. If one person's external Reiatsu surpasses the Reiatsu concentrated in another Zanpakuto blade, the latter's attacks won't even be able to scratch them. No defensive action would be necessary. This was exactly what happened during Kenpachi and Ichigo's first encounter. Ichigo's Zangetsu couldn't even cut through Kenpachi's skin. Moreover, Zanpakuto and its Shinigami are two sides of the same coin. A Shinigami's Zanpakuto grows alongside them. In its Shikai state, a Zanpakuto's sharpness rivals that of a great grade blade in the One Piece world. When released into Bankai, its strength matches even the legendary supreme grade blades. Jin's Zanpakuto had already developed its spirit to the point where it could achieve Shikai, making it comparable to a great grade blade. Kyoya's current mastery of breadth of all things wasn't sufficient to perceive the breadth of a Zanpakuto and cut through it. As for flying slash attacks, that was even more unrealistic. Kyoya was being relentlessly pushed back by Jin's assaults, leaving him no opportunity to unleash such a technique. Is this what a true genius looks like? For the first time, Kyoya fully grasped the gap in talent between. Even if he had his cheat, the One Piece achievement system, Kyoya was still vastly outmatched by Jin in terms of current strength. Given the same amount of training time, Kyoya was completely outclassed. To gain an edge in this battle, Kyoya needed to capitalize on his own strengths. With that thought, Kyoya relied on his observation haki to block and evade Jin's attacks while silently reciting a Kido incantation under his breath. And quat, Bakud number 8 Seki, and quat, Kyoya murmured, flicking his left hand to erect a repulsive barrier between himself and Jin. Bang, bang, bang crack. Jin's white blade struck the transparent barrier, sending ripples through it before finally shattering the Kido shield. Still, it bought Kyoya a single second of breathing room. Whoosh! With a burst of Reiatsu underfoot, Kyoya activated Shunpo, instantly retreating 5 meters to create distance. Then, locking onto Jin with his Kenbun Shoku Haki, he raised his Zanpakuto high. And quat, slash, and quat. With a fierce shout, Kyoya brought his blade down, unleashing a crescent-shaped slash that shot toward Jin. Like a white moonbeam. Boom! Jin blocked the attack with a one-handed grip, but the sheer force sent him skidding backward, his feet carving twin trails into the ground. Boom! A surge of white Reiatsu erupted from Jin's body, enveloping his Zanpakuto. Then, with a sharp flick of his wrist, Jin deflected the shear, crashing into the ground and carving a trench over 10 meters long before dissipating. And quat, this guy is strange, and quat, Jin kept his sword at the ready, his narrowed eyes fixed warily on Kyoya. What struck Jin as odd wasn't Kyoya's ability to launch flying slashes. As the examiner for this test, Jin wasn't completely uninformed about Kyoya. In the Shino Academy, Kyoya was often compared to Jin by both instructors and students. Unlike Jin, who excelled in all areas, Kyoya was renowned specifically for his Zanjutsu. He's a prodigy who, in less than half a year after enrollment, had already mastered basic Zanjutsu to the point of being able to unleash Kanatsu. Therefore, Jin had anticipated Kyoya's range slashes. What truly unsettled him was the inexplicable strangeness he sensed during their battle. It is obvious that his sword is faster than Kyoya's. Logically speaking, he should have defeated Kyoya in mere moments. 66%, however, Kyoya seemed to see through all of his attacks, effortlessly parrying every strike. Even when he couldn't block in time, he would just so happen to evade with perfect timing. It felt as though no matter how Jin attacked, it was futile. Is this his Zanpakuto's ability? But Jin didn't sense any release of Reiatsu from Kyoya. Could such a power be learned? Countless thoughts flashed through Jin's mind. But soon, Jin quickly suppressed them all. Because before him, wave after wave of slashes. Swish, swish, swish. Kyoya wasn't surprised when Jin deflected the first slash. His current mastery of breath of all things was still shallow, barely enough to qualify as a great swordsman. As for Jin, though he had only been a true Shinigami for less than a year, his Ryoryoku had already reached the 5th class. Therefore, while Kyoya's slashes posed a threat, they weren't lethal. Moreover, Jin had already mastered his Zanpakuto's Shikai. If he chose to release it, the gap between them would widen even further. There was no helping it. Jin was a natural-born genius, and after joining the 5th division, his mentor had been none other than Aizen, a Shinigami, who had already reached the pinnacle of power. As for Kyoya, if it weren't for his observation haki and his mastery in swordsmanship, he wouldn't even be worth comparing to Jin. This alone demonstrated just how powerful observation haki truly was. So without hesitation, Kyoya locked onto Jin with his haki and unleashed 3 consecutive slashes to suppress him, then immediately began chanting a Kido incantation. And quat, ye lord, mask of flesh and bone, all creation, flutter of wings, and quat, ye who bears the name of man, truth and temperance, and quat, upon this sinless wall of dreams unleash but slightly the wrath of your claws, and quat, had number 33 and quat. As Kyoya chanted, pale blue flames gathered into a blazing fireball in Kyoya's palm. Suddenly, his expression twisted in alarm. His observation haki had sensed Jin's next move. Chapter 22. With the line breaks removed. Amid the billowing smoke, Kyoya felt a tremendous force slam into him, sending him flying backward. The blade pressing against his Zanpakuto made his eyebrows twitch violently. Are you kidding me? Is he trying to kill me? If I remembered correctly, Jin had said this battle was merely an assessment, an evaluation conducted by the 5th Division. Or, in other words, an evaluation by Aizen. But what the hell is going on now? Jin actually released his Zanpakuto. The overwhelming Reiatsu erupting from Jin at such close range made it hard for Kyoya to even breathe. By conservative estimates, Jin's current Riryoku had likely reached 4th class. Jin's innate Riryoku was already 5th class, a level befitting a lieutenant. Now, with his Zanpakuto released, Jin's Riryoku surged even further. Even if it hadn't quite reached 4th class, it was frighteningly close. Even without releasing his Zanpakuto, Jin had been able to suppress Kyoya effortlessly. Now that he had, even with Kyoya's observation haki allowing him to perceive Jin's movements, his body simply couldn't react fast enough. Kyoya felt the pressure on his blade lighten as the white sword retracted. From within the smoke, Jin's figure slowly emerged. Under the force of Jin's Reiatsu, the flames from the explosion were forcibly pushed aside. Kyoya's gaze, along with his observation haki, locked onto the small, almost toy-like Zanpakuto in Jin's hand. Shinso, even with his observation haki, Kyoya's current abilities were far too lacking to safely handle Jin's shikai. Dangerous. The higher the Riryoku class, the more pronounced the gap became. Kyoya's current Riryoku hadn't even reached 7th class, let alone Jin's 5th class. The difference was simply too vast. And that wasn't even accounting for the fact that Jin had now released his Zanpakuto. While the commotion from their battle would undoubtedly attract attention, and within a minute, Academy's instructors would arrive to investigate, Kyoya wasn't confident he could last even that long against Jin. Taking a deep breath, Kyoya steadied himself, raising his Zanpakuto horizontally before him. He placed his left hand over the blade, and quat, shine, armor no Murakumo, and quat, boom. With Kyoya's roar, his Zanpakuto erupted in a blinding golden radiance. Starting from the hilt, as Kyoya's left hand swept across the blade, the steel transformed into a sword of condensed light. This was Kyoya's partial shikai, armor no Murakumo. The Pika Pika no Mi, one of the most powerful Logia-type devil fruits in the One Piece world, had become a Zanpakuto of the highest caliber in the Bleach world as well. Well, the strongest light-type Zanpakuto, at least. In the One Piece world, the most fundamental ability of a Logia was intangible elementalization, the power to negate physical attacks. As long as one had consumed a Logia-type devil fruit, unless the opponent possessed a counter-element or mastered haki, they couldn't harm the Logia user at all. Unfortunately, Kyoya's current spiritual pressure was fa Coefficient PT to fully unleash the Dilko Rico no Mi's abolitio sufficient to fully unleash the Pika Pika no Mi's abilities. After negotiations with Borsalino, Kyoya's partial shikai manifested as his signature weapon, Ama no Murakumo. And it just so happens that Kyoya's main Focus so far has been swordsmanship. And quat. Oh, and quat. Seeing Kyoya release his Zanpakuto, Jin Ichimaru halted his steps. Even for someone like him, it was only after reaching the 6th class Reiryoku that he had nurtured the spirit within his Zanpakuto enough to achieve Shikai. Yet Kyoya, with only 8th class Reiryoku, had just barely met the conditions for nurturing his Zanpakuto's spirit, reaching 6th class Reiryoku only after releasing it. As expected, this Kyoya was anything but ordinary. And quat. Ara, Kyoya-kun, you've really given me quite the surprise, and quat. Jin dispersed the Reiatsu around him, sealed his Zanpakuto back into its Shikai state, and returned it to its sheath. However, despite Jin's actions, Kyoya didn't drop his defensive stance. And quat. What's this? Are you admitting defeat, Ichimaru-senpai, and quat, though outmatched in strength? Kyoya's words refused to concede. And quat. Hi, I lose, and quat, contrary to Kyoya's expectations, Jin merely chuckled in response, unfazed by the outcome of their battle. Or perhaps, from Jin's perspective, who won or lost in this fight didn't matter at all. Jin spread his hands and said, and quat, Kyoya-kun, your strength has already surpassed that of an ordinary Shino Academy student. Staying at the academy will only stagnate your growth. So, how about joining the 5th division? I can recommend you to Lieutenant Aizen. If you're willing, I can promise you a position as a seated officer, and quat, a seated officer, and quat. Hearing this, even Kyoya couldn't hide his surprise. After all, in the Gotei 13, aside from the 11th division, other divisions placed heavy emphasis on seniority. The 11th division was a combat-focused squad, operating on the principle that the strong rise and the weak fall. Battle was the 11th division's very essence. Without sufficient strength, even those who attained seated officer, lieutenant, or even captains positions could be overthrown by someone stronger. In other divisions, however, the selection and promotion of officers lay entirely in the hands of the captain. Captains held the authority to appoint and replace lieutenants. Lieutenants, in turn, had the power to nominate seated officers, though their decisions still required the captain's approval. Otherwise, a captain could strip a seated officer of their rank with a single word. It is not an exaggeration to say that the captain is the absolute authority within a division. Under normal circumstances, captains rarely paid attention to unseated Shinigami. After all, those who couldn't even achieve Zanpakuto Shikai often died in battle during missions. Investing too much emotion in unseated soldiers would only lead to equal grief when they inevitably fell. Younger captains might endure it, but those who had witnessed countless deaths had long since learned to protect themselves. Therefore, unless a captain personally appointed someone, seated officer promotions were usually left to their lieutenant's recommendation, which the captain would typically approve. However, Kyoya knew one thing. In the 5th division, though Aizen held the lieutenant's position, the 5th division's captain, Shinji Hirako, did not trust him. Chapter 23 Rejection. In fact, the fundamental reason why Aizen became the lieutenant of the 5th division was precisely because the captain of the 5th division, Hirako Shinji, wanted to keep him close, under his personal surveillance. However, judging by how events unfolded later, it remains unclear whether Shinji genuinely sensed something about Aizen or if Aizen intentionally allowed Hirako to perceive it. But none of this had anything to do with Kyoya. At least, before he had grown strong enough, he had no intention of getting too involved with troublesome figures like Aizen. On one hand, his observation haki had not yet reached the level of hearing the voice of all things, or future sight, meaning he couldn't maintain clarity under the influence of Aizen's Kyoka Suigetsu. On the other hand, Kyoya himself was an anomaly in the world of the Shinigami due to the One Piece achievement system. If he were to attract Aizen's research interests, he couldn't guarantee that he wouldn't end up as one of Aizen's lab subjects. Thus, when faced with Ikimaru Jin's invitation, Kyoya decisively shook his head in refusal. And quote, "I'm sorry, Ichimaru senpai, and quote, I already have a division in mind that I want to join, so I'll have to decline your kind offer. And quote, is that so? And quote." Upon hearing Kyoya's rejection, Jin tucked his hands into the sleeves of his shihakusho, fell silent for a few seconds, and then grinned. And quote, "Well, someone as talented as you, Kyoya, must already have a clear plan for your future path, and quote, my invitation must have been too sudden, and quote, but I'm curious, which division are you planning to join, and quote, of course, the 11th division, and quote, returning his Zanpakuto to its sheath at his waist, Kyoya said, and quote, "Ichimaru senpai, my talents lie almost entirely in Zanjutsu, and quote, and when it comes to mastering Zanjutsu, combat is undoubtedly the fastest path to improvement, and quote, the 11th division is a combat-focused division, one that provides the most opportunities for real battles. It's the best fit for my future growth, and quote, so, as long as I successfully graduate from the Shino Academy, the 11th division will be my top choice, and quote." This wasn't a lie to Jin. While it was true that joining the 3rd, 5th, 7th, 9th, or 10th division would be the optimal path if Kyoya wanted to become a captain of the Gotei 13 in the shortest time possible, the future held complications. Within the next few decades, Aizen's holification experiments would infect the captains of those divisions. 3rd Division's Otoribashi Rojuro, 5th Division's Hirako Shinji, 7th Division's Aikawa Rabu, and 9th Division's Muguruma Kensei, forcing them to flee with Urahara Kisuke and Shihoin Yoruichi's help, and form the Visored. Thus, the captain positions of the 3rd, 5th, 7th, and 9th divisions would become vacant. The 2nd division is originally the Shihoin clan's on Mitsukido unit. So even if Yoruichi left, they would never accept Kyoya as the captain. Similarly, no matter how strong Kyoya became, he could never surpass Kuratsuchi Mayuri for the captain's position of the 12th division. After all, the 12th division was the Research and Development Institute, where only scientific prowess could earn the respect of its officers and members. As for the 10th division, the incident involving Aizen's artificial Vasto Lord, White, would drag its captain, Isshin Shiba, into the chaos. Therefore, if Kyoya wanted to become a captain, joining the 3rd, 5th, 7th, 9th, or 10th division would be the best choice. But before that, Kyoya needed to raise his strength to a he could be nominated for the position of captain, becoming an official division member, then a seated officer, a high-ranking officer, a lieutenant, and finally a captain would undoubtedly trigger certain achievements, granting Kyoya rewards from the system. If he joined other divisions, even if his strength was sufficient, he would still need to grind through seniority for promotions. Take Hitsugaya Toshiro, the future captain of the 10th division, for example. By the time he joined the 10th division, his strength already surpassed Rangiku's. However, the lieutenant of the 10th division is still Rangiku. Though Hitsugaya was groomed by Shiba as the 10th division's future captain, he was still only the 3rd seat at the time. Only the 11th division valued strength above all else. As long as Kyoya was strong enough, he could challenge any seated officer, lieutenant, or even the captain at any time, and if he won, he would take their position. Even if Kyoya ultimately failed to defeat the 11th division's captain and claim the position, as long as he demonstrated captain-level strength during their battle, he would be the first candidate the other captains considered whenever a vacancy arose. After all, if only 1 or 2 captain positions were empty, the Gotei 13 wouldn't be too concerned. There were already non-captains with captain-level strength in the Gotei 13. In emergencies, they could temporarily serve as acting captains. If there was no urgency, waiting a few decades would allow each division to nurture its own captain. But a single incident that wiped out 6 captains and the Kido Corps commander would be a devastating blow to the Gotei 13. The Sairete would need to fill those positions as quickly as possible to restore morale among the lower-ranked Shinigami. At the very least, if Kyoya hadn't risen to lieutenant in the 11th Division within 10 years, he could always transfer to one of those other divisions as a 3rd seat or lieutenant. After that, as long as he avoided getting involved in the investigations when Aizen removed those captains, his promotion.to captain would be all but guaranteed. And quat, the 11th Division, huh? And quat, that does seem like a good fit for you, Kyoya-kun, and quat. Well then, I'll wish you the best of luck in joining the 11th Division, and quat. See you tilde and quat. With that, Jin waved at Kyoya and vanished into the night. And quat, ha, and quat. Only when Jin was completely out of his observation Haki's range did Kyoya finally let out a sigh of relief. So strong. That brief battle had made Kyoya fully aware of the gap between himself and Jin. Even with observation Haki, he had been completely suppressed in their fight. The difference in their base stats was simply too vast. Even if Kyoya could sense Ichimaru's movements with observation Haki, his body couldn't react fast enough to keep up. Though he had used partial Shikai, he knew that if the fight had continued, he would have lost. The gap between 8th class Riryoku and 5th class Riryoku was one factor. But the biggest reason is, his opponent was Ikemaru Jin. Chapter 24 Blue Tier Achievement. Looking at the Bleach world, there are very few people who can rival Jin in terms of talent. Even after Jin sacrificed a part of his soul to restore Ranjiku's damaged soul, leaving his own soul incomplete and significantly affecting his natural talent, his prowess remains undeniable. Against an opponent with 5th class Riryoku, Kyoya was confident that with the aid of observation Haki, he could at least retreat unscathed even if he couldn't win. After all, observation Haki is one of the Haki, a very powerful ability in the One Piece world. In the One Piece world, becoming a Commodore requires mastery of at least one form of Haki. Only by mastering 2 types of Haki can one rise to the rank of Vice Admiral. The only reason Kyoya found himself in such a dire situation was that his opponent happened to be Jin. Moreover, this battle revealed a critical weakness in Kyoya's abilities. His low Riryoku meant that, in close combat, the power behind his sword strikes was lacking. Against ordinary opponents, Kyoya's strength and speed were more than sufficient. But at a certain level, who isn't a genius? This was especially true for lieutenants. While their positions were appointed directly by their captains and they might not necessarily be the strongest in their division aside from the captain, those chosen by their captains would inevitably grow stronger over time, even if they started off relatively weak. To improve his speed and power, raising his Riryoku was the most effective and comprehensive method. Kyoya's natural Riryoku talent was unremarkable. Without the One Piece achievement system, it might him decades, or even a century, to reach 6th class Riri 4th class Reiatsu. The level of a lieutenant would have been his limit. But now, as long as he completed achievements recognized by the One Piece achievement system, Kyoya could use the power of that world to break past his inherent limitations. Perhaps I can use Reiatsu to enhance my strength and speed. What came to mind was the scene where Ichigo cloaked his sword with Getsuga Tensho during his battle Against Ulquiorra Cipher, the Cuatro Espada. If I can also wrap my flying slash around my Zanpakuto, my offensive power would at least double. Additionally, I could try point blank. Getsuga. Rubbing his chin, Kyoya decided that, for the foreseeable future, his training would focus on these two directions. After sending away the instructors who had come to investigate the commotion, Kyoya didn't continue his training but instead returned to his dorm. This wasn't because he wanted to slack off. It was because when Jin told him he had passed the test and invited him to join the 5th Division, a ding had echoed in his mind. Clearly, the One Piece achievement system had recognized another achievement. So, Kyoya wanted to return to his dorm to claim the reward. If nothing unexpected happens, this achievement reward would grant him another significant power boost. As it happened, he had just fought against Jin, and since he was a genius, it was reasonable for him to gain some insights. Sitting cross-legged on his bed, Kyoya immersed his consciousness into his soul. Soon, within his spiritual space, he saw a third type of glow. So far, the One Piece achievement system had displayed 3 tiers of achievements. The lowest tier emitted a white glow. X. Its effect granted Kyoya anywhere from 1 month to a year's worth of training. Results from the One Piece world. Next were the gold tier achievements, which Kyoya currently considered the highest tier. Every ability unlocked from a gold tier achievement was extraordinarily powerful. Kyoya had unlocked 2 gold tier achievements so far. The first was from the faction reward pack, which granted him observation haki. The second was from the devil fruit user achievement, which gave him the Pika Pika no Mi ability. Now, Kyoya had finally encountered a third color, blue. Blue tier achievements were stronger than white ones but weaker than gold. Judging by the size of this blue orb, it ranked in the upper middle tier among blue tier achievements. Congratulations, host, for obtaining the achievement, recognition of an admiral candidate. Though you have not officially joined the Marines, your efforts and talent have earned the acknowledgement of an admiral candidate. Would you like to open the achievement reward pack? Recognition of an admiral candidate. Kyoya's eyes flickered as he pondered for a moment. Before nodding, Jin had been sent by Aizen to test him, meaning Kyoya had already caught Aizen's attention. Aizen was a lieutenant, so if translated into One Piece world, calling him an admiral candidate wasn't entirely wrong. Since Jin had acted on Aizen's behalf in assessing Kyoya, his recognition could, in a way, be considered Aizen's acknowledgement as well. Of course, the One Piece achievement system labeling Jin as an admiral candidate was a bit of a stretch, but it wasn't completely unreasonable. Download API read offline. However, ever since this unreliable system had started reliably, Kyoya had decided not to overthink its mechanics. As long as it kept dinging and giving him rewards, he wouldn't question it. After all, given his current level, he wouldn't be able to figure it out anyway. Rather than obsessing over it, he might as well relax and enjoy the benefits the system provided. As for the future, he'd leave that to his future self. Open it. Ding. At Kyoya's mental command, the blue orb within the One Piece achievement system shattered into countless glowing particles, merging into his soul. Congratulations, host, for obtaining 6 months of training results in the Marines Rokushiki, Iron Body. Boom! Another half-year's worth of training memories flooded into Kyoya's mind, causing his Riryoku to break through from 8th class to 7th class. Moreover, unlike previous rewards that focused solely on swordsmanship, 6 months of training in Iron Body also brought about physical changes. If, just a moment ago, Kyoya had the slender, refined appearance of someone like Jin Ichimaru, now, his shoulders had broadened. His muscles had gained defined ridges, and he had even grown 3 centimeters taller. So strong. Opening his eyes, Kyoya clenched his fists experimentally, feeling as though he could crush the air. itself. Though he failed to actually compress the atmosphere after several attempts, it still demonstrated just how much his body had transformed. Of course, for Kyoya, the most crucial aspect of Iron Body was its effect on his Reiatsu potential. The beings of the Soul Society did not possess true Fizz bodies. Their forms were composed entirely of Reishi. Chapter 25 Willpower. The Marines' Rokushiki serve as the foundation for the Marines' dominance as the strongest military force in the One Piece world. Once a Marine's physical training reaches a certain level, they gain access to the practice of the Rokushiki. These techniques are not just combat skills for low to mid-ranking Marines but also profound methods for honing the body. Every soldier who masters all Rokushiki techniques is, at minimum, a Rear Admiral level powerhouse. Moreover, those who comprehend the secret of Rokushiki, life return, can further enhance their physical prowess. In the Bleach world, the stronger a Shinigami's body, the more Ryoku they can condense, which in turn amplifies their Reiatsu. Though Kyoya has only obtained the results of Iron Body's training for half a year, it is already enough to break through his innate limitations as a Shinigami, elevating his potential. If Kyoya's original Shinigami potential was only at the level of a lieutenant with 5th class Ryoku, then mastering Iron Body has made achieving 4th class Ryoku well within his grasp. Should Kyoya fully master the Marines' Rokushiki and use them to strengthen his body, it wouldn't be impossible for him to reach a level similar to Kenpachi, possessing captain-level combat strength even without releasing his Zanpakuto. In the One Piece world, the strong primarily train will. After adapting to his suddenly enhanced physique, Kyoya fell into contemplation. For now, focusing on the One Piece's training system is the most effective way for Kyoya to grow stronger. Therefore, Kyoya began to wonder, should he gradually align his mindset and actions with the ways of the One Piece world? In the One Piece world, will can manifest as haki to strengthen oneself. This is especially true for those who possess Conqueror. These individuals rely on their will to enhance the Pote Conqueror's haki. With the One Piece achievement system, Kyoya believes that one day, he will inevitably awaken Conqueror's haki. If his will is insufficient by then, his Conqueror's haki might remain nothing more than a tool for clearing out weaklings. While the One Piece achievement system includes options for training haki, it's clear that such training would only apply to observation haki and armament haki. The will behind Conqueror's haki is a fusion of one's experiences, knowledge, strength, and mentality, a form of Reiatsu capable of influencing reality. Without sufficient will to command it, so-called Conqueror's haki might not even compare to a Shinigami's and quat, Reiatsu burst, and quat. Then, starting now, I shall set a goal for myself. Join the 11th Division, and become its captain, and quat. Bang. Kyoya clenched his fist, producing a faint sound. Anyone who stands in my way, whether it's Kuriashiki Kenpachi, Azashiro Kenpachi, Gozen Kenpachi, Kiganjo Kenpachi, or Zaraki Kenpachi, will be crushed beneath my feet, becoming stepping stones on my path to claiming the title of Kenpachi, and quat. T.N. The author named the 9th Gozen Kenpachi. Kyoya's ambition is to become the strongest. Coincidentally, in the Sairete, the first captain of the 11th Division, Unohana Retsu, left behind the legend of Kenpachi. Only the strongest Shinigami can bear the name Kenpachi. Though the Kenpachi title eventually became synonymous with the captain of the 11th Division, none can deny the recognition Shinigami hold for the strongest, the one who earns the name Kenpachi. Kyoya didn't know whether the other captains of the 11th Division were truly the strongest Shinigami. But as for him, his ambition was to surpass Yamamoto and become the strongest Shinigami, making the title of Kenpachi true to its name. At this point in time, Kyoya Wasn't sure who the current captain of the 11th Division was. From what he knew, it could be one of 5 individuals: Kurashiki Kenpachi, Asashiro Kenpachi, Gozen Kenpachi, Kiganjo Kenpachi, or Zaraki Kenpachi. Among them, the strongest should be Kurashiki Kenpachi. His power was so immense that even Ichibei of the Zero Division broke the division's usual invitation protocol to recruit him. The standard rule for joining the Zero Division was that a Shinigami must create something previously non-existent in Soul Society to earn the right to be summoned as one of the Soul King's protectors. At present, aside from Ichibei, the other 3 members of the Zero Division were God of the Sword, Nimaya Utsu, who created the Zanpakuto, Great Weave Guard, Shutara Senjumaru, who invented Shihakusho, and the Hot Spring Demon, Korinji Tenjiro, who developed Kaido. The remaining member was the current 12th Division's captain, Hikifune Kiryu, who would later ascend by creating the Artificial Soul, earning the title, Ruler of Grain. Kurashiki was no researcher, he had invented nothing new. Despite this, he still received an invitation to the Zero Division. This alone spoke volumes about his overwhelming strength. In fact, his power was so fearsome that the Central 46 explicitly forbade him from releasing his Zanpakuto's Bankai within Sairete. Asashiro Kenpachi becomes the 8th Kenpachi after defeating Kurashiki. Of course, the reason why Asashiro defeated Kurashiki is only because he was exploiting an opportunity when Kurashiki was weakened. Moreover, during their battle, Kurashiki was bound by the Central 46's decree and never released his Zanpakuto, while Kuratsuchi used his Bankai freely. Both ended up severely wounded, and Kurashiki could have even taken Asashiro down with him if he wished. However, this didn't diminish Asashiro's own terrifying. Gozen Kenpachi, the 9th Kenpachi, was a disgrace to the title. Originally Asashiro's lieutenant, he inherited the position after Asashiro turned himself in and was imprisoned in Mukan. His strength wasn't even at captain level. Kiganjo Kenpachi is the 10th Kenpachi after defeating Gozen. Though he had captain-level combat ability, he was far from being among the elite. As for Zaraki Kenpachi, in his fully realized state, he could rightfully be called the strongest Kenpachi of all. But at this point in time, Zaraki was still far from awakening his true potential. Without Unohana Retsu's Bankai, he had no means of rapidly unlocking his full power. His growth would come only through relentless battles, gradually unleashing his Reiatsu in combat. Excluding Gozen and Kiganjo, the remaining 3 Kenpachis were anything but ordinary. But that's what makes it exciting, isn't it? A smirk curled on Kyoya's lips. Having solidified his resolve, he could feel a shift in his mentality, an unshakable confidence surging from within, an unwavering belief in his future triumph. On the path that I have chosen, any obstacle in his way would be crushed without exception. Chapter 26 Graduation Assessment. And quote, Kyoya, over here, and quote, on the training grounds, the 6th year instructor immediately waved at Kyoya upon spotting him. And quote, coming, sensei, and quote. Kyoya responded and made his way to the instructor. Today was the examination day for the 6th grade students, and Kyoya was naturally among them. Alongside Kyoya, over 20 others were also participating in the exam. Surrounding them were several black-clad Shinigami standing expressionlessly nearby. These Shinigami served as both examiners for the test and protectors for the students, having trained the students all the way to their 6th grade, granting them a certain level of combat ability. The Sairete would never allow them to die so easily. After all, even if they failed to graduate, they could still be assigned to the expeditionary force in Hueco Mundo, allowing them to contribute to the world in some capacity. And quote. This time, your exam location will be in the human world's Mibu town, and Kyoya. Since this is your first time participating in the exam, you need to be aware that the hollows you'll face won't be as weak as the experimental hollows used in the academy, and these are real hollows, and both in terms of strength and intelligence, they are no less formidable than Shinigami, and if you let your guard down even slightly, you will absolutely die, and if you encounter danger, your first priority should be to escape, and Nomura-sensei, and a loud shout abruptly cut off the instructor's words. A Shinigami clad in a black shihakusho, hands in his pockets, glared. Once they became full-fledged Shinigami, how many of them would still respect the rules and guidance of the academy? The moment they stepped into the ranks of the Gotei 13, their allegiance and duty would shift entirely to their division and the Sairete as a whole. The authority of the academy, while influential in shaping their skills and discipline, would no longer dictate their actions. Kyoya and the other sixth-year students listened intently, their expressions serious. The words of the black-clad Shinigami carried the weight of experience and expectation. They understood that becoming a Shinigami wasn't merely about power or rank, it was about responsibility, sacrifice, and the courage to face death if necessary. Nomura, still silent, could only watch as the students absorbed the lesson. His own ideals of protecting students and ensuring their survival clashed with the uncompromising truth of Shinigami duty. But he also knew that this reality was what forged the strongest warriors. The black-clad Shinigami, satisfied that his message had landed, finally glanced at Kyoya. His piercing gaze seemed to measure the young student's resolve, as if testing whether Kyoya truly understood the gravity of the path he had chosen. The teachers they once viewed as powerful, and my apologies, I misspoke, and Kyoya watched as Nomura lowered his head in apology and shook it slightly. At this moment, Kyoya suddenly realized that he had been in the Shino Academy for nearly a year and could only remember 6 instructors: the first grade Zanjutsu instructor, the second grade Ho-Ho instructor, the third grade Kido instructor, the fourth grade combat instructor, the sixth grade instructor, and the academy's head instructor. 6 teachers in total. As for the fifth grade instructor, Kyoya had only met them once, a brief encounter, leaving no real impression. It wasn't until today that Kyoya learned the 6th grade instructor's name was Nomura. As for the other instructors, he didn't even know their names, he only vaguely remembered their appearances. Come to think of it, he realized he was just like those Shinigami, lacking any real reverence for the instructors of the Shino Academy. However, Kyoya saw nothing wrong with that mindset. Though he wasn't a pirate, he had resolved to pursue the freedom he desired in the Shinigami world, to become the freest man in this world. If he wanted to get to know someone, he would. If he didn't, he wouldn't waste time forcing connections. Before long, the Shinigami who appeared to be the leader stepped forward, drew the Zan, the human world, the physical realm where the living resided, Soul Society, the afterlife where souls went after death, Hyuko Mundo, the domain where fallen souls became hollows. These 4 worlds were separated by the Dangai, the precipice world. The pathways connecting these realms within the Dangai were known as Garganta. Hollows from Hyuko Mundo instinctively possessed the ability to open Garganta, allowing them to travel between Hyuko Mundo, the human world, and Soul Society. Shinigami, on the other hand, required specialized methods to construct stable passages through the Dangai. This ability was called the Senkaimon. Normally, Shinigami had to submit a request and receive approval before using the Senkaimon. Of course, some noble families possessed their own private Senkaimon. free from the Gotei 13's oversight. And quat, follow me, and quat. Once the Senkaiman was opened, the Shinigami stepped inside first, with Kyoya and the others close behind. The passage through the dangai resembled the interior of some monstrous creature's intestines, dark, winding, and oppressive. Ahead of them, a black hell butterfly guided the way. Though everyone could move much faster than the butterfly, no one dared to overtake it. After all, within the dangai, only the hell butterfly could navigate the chaotic flow of time and space. Without its guidance, and lacking the Reiatsu to sense the dangai's exit, they would lose their way, doomed to wander the precipice world forever. Since ancient times, the number of Shinigami lost in the dangai hadn't been high, but cases still emerged periodically. Chapter 27 First Arrival in the Human World. It could be said that the Soul Society's research on the dangai had persisted from the creation of the three realms up to the present, spanning over a million years. Within the 12th Division, there had always been a department dedicated to monitoring the dangai, staffed by researchers who each possessed a profound understanding of time or space. Among the Gotei 13, the 12th Division was perhaps the only one where seated officers were appointed not based on combat strength but on scientific research capabilities. And quat, we're almost there, and quat, traveling through the dangai didn't take much time. In less than a minute, everyone could see a white point of light ahead in the passage, the exit of the Senkaiman to the human world. Upon stepping out of the Senkaiman, what greeted Kyoya's eyes wasn't a modern landscape of towering buildings, glittering lights or bustling streets. Instead, it was a scene not much different from the Soul Society: wooden huts, thatched cottages, and even crude shelters made of a few branches. Apart from a few exceptions, most of the people looked emaciated and wore tattered clothing. Seeing this, Kyoya fell silent. He had forgotten that it was still nearly 100 years away from the main plot. Human technological advancement would only begin to flourish in the next 30 years or so. If nothing unexpected happens, the human world right now was still in the warring states period. The appearance of Kyoya and the others didn't stir any reaction among the people of Mibu Town. Humans couldn't see or touch SP without Reiatsu, living hum entire Toei. Kyoya expanded his observation haki, enveloping. The town had a population of around 800. Perhaps, 100 years later, a settlement of a few hundred people would be considered nothing more than a desolate village. But in this era, a town of nearly 1,000 people could be called a city. Calling this place a small town was clearly a judgment made by the Soul Reapers of the Sairete, based on the scale of the Rukongai in the Soul Society. In truth, this was the most densely populated area within dozens of kilometers. If a hollow were to descend from Hueco Mundo into the living world to hunt, this would undoubtedly be the best location within a 100-mile radius. And quat. All right, students, and quat. Your assessment this time will involve guarding this area for 1 month, and quat. Next, I'll divide this town into 9 zones. Each group of 3 will be responsible for 1 zone, performing soul burials on the spirits of the deceased within your assigned area and guiding them to the Soul Society, and quat. If a hollow manifests in your designated zone, you'll be responsible for purifying it, and quat. There are only 2 criteria for passing the assessment, and quat. First, fulfill your duties as Shinigami and survive, and quat. Of course, if you encounter a hollow beyond your ability to handle, you can call for our support, and quat. However, doing so will result in an automatic failure, and quat. Secondly, if more than 5 souls are devoured by hollows in your zone within this month, you'll also be judged as failing, and quat. 9 zones. Along with Kyoya, the 20-plus students leaped onto their rooftops. Though Mibu town wasn't very large, dividing it into NIT meant each area spanned roughly 500 meters in radius. With 3 people guarding each zone, if someone encountered a hollow, they would only need to hold out for about 10 seconds before reinforcements arrived from their teammates, making the danger relatively manageable. But that was only if they faced a single hollow they could handle. If they were attacked by 2 or more hollows, or a medium-sized hollow, they would inevitably have to call for the examiner's assistance. And quote, examiner, if no hollows descend in our assigned zone during this month, does that still count as passing the assessment? And quote, one of the students asked. Since this Shinigami had confronted teacher Nomura in the academy, everyone was a bit wary of him. And quote, correct, and quote, the Shinigami glanced at the questioning student and nodded. And quote, luck, to some extent, is also part of one's strength. For the same mission, some encounter powerful enemies, while others only face small fry. The outcomes are different. Of course, since this is an assessment, your final results will also depend on your achievements. If no hollows descend in your assigned zone, you can still pass. However, you won't receive the benefits that come with purifying hollows. Similarly, if your zone is attacked by multiple hollows, and you manage to purify them all, your graduation assessment score will be greatly boosted. You might not understand now, but once you join the Gotei 13, you'll realize that those who pass by killing hollows and those who pass without doing so receive different treatment within their divisions. And quote, sir, what if a hollow from an adjacent zone intrudes into our assigned area? Which group gets credit? And quote, seeing that the examiner seemed approachable, another asked. And quote, naturally, it's credited to the zone where the hollow is purified. If you can't even keep a hollow that appears in your own zone, you don't deserve bonus points. Additionally, if anyone deliberately lures a hollow from their zone into another, resulting in the death of another student, I will disqualify them. And quote, thank you for clarifying, examiner, and quote. Alright, you, and you, responsible for Zone 1. You, the 2 of you, are in charge of Zone 2, and quote. Soon, under the examiner's assignments, the students dispersed to their respective zones. Kyoya was assigned to Zone 7, along with 2 young men around 18 or 19 years old. And quote, Kyoya, it looks like we're riding your coattails for this assessment. And quote. Once they arrived in Zone 7, the 2 students smiled at Kyoya. Though Kyoya hadn't spent much time in the 6th grade, his reputation in the Shino Academy was well known. They might question his height, but they couldn't doubt his strength. To put it bluntly, even the instructors acknowledged that Kyoya already possessed the power of a full-fledged Shinigami, and not a weak one at that. If anyone in this assessment was guaranteed to pass with absolute certainty, everyone present would undoubtedly point to Kyoya. This was evident from the envious looks the other students gave the 2 of them. Being grouped with Kyoya meant they had essentially secured their graduation seals in advance. And quote, I'm Fujita Toyohara, and this is Otomo Yusuke. For this assessment, we'll follow your lead completely, Kyoya. And quote, clearly, Fujita Toyohara and Otomo Yusuke knew their place. They were just hangers on clinging to Kyoya's coattails. Their best move was to follow orders without question. Chapter 28, The Coming Hollow. And quote, Fujita-kun, Otomo-kun, and quote, if you say so, then I won't hold back. And quote, for the next month, I'll leave the patrols and soul burials to the 2 of you. And quote, if any hollows appear, I'll rush over immediately. And quote, Kyoya didn't reject Fujita and Otomo's goodwill. After all, for him, spending time on something as trivial as patrols was a complete waste. Within a radius of just 500 meters, Kyoya could easily monitor the entire area by spreading his observation haki. Handing over the patrol and soul burial duties to the two of them was the most efficient choice. And quote, "Don't worry, Kyoya-kun, and quote, leave these small tasks to us." And quote. After Fujita and Otomo left, Kyoya found an open space, drew the zanpakuto at his waist, and began swinging his sword toward the sky. Each swing released a white slash. However, the slashes Kyoya produced now were nowhere near as large as the ones he'd unleashed during his fight with Jin, nor did they travel as far. Although Kyoya's Riryoku had now reached the 7th class, just one step away from achieving a complete Shikai, the enemies he would face in the near future would still outclass him in Reiatsu for some time. Under such circumstances, Kyoya had prioritized mastering the technique of imbuing his flying slash directly into his sword strikes. Once perfected, this technique would allow him to augment every swing with the additional power of his flying slash, significantly boosting his combat strength in close-quarters battles. Moreover, the power of these flying slash would grow as Kyoya deepened his understanding of breadth of all things. This was a technique that would serve him for a lifetime. The key to this move lay in synchronizing the slash with the SWOL swing, ensuring that their combined force achieved an effect greater than the sum of its parts. With the assistance of observation, haki and breadth of all things, Kyoya could constantly adjust his swings and slashes, refining them with each repetition. Based on his own estimates, he would likely perfect this technique after a few thousand more minor adjustments. Kyoya's actions were observed by many students and examiners, but no one commented. The students were already accustomed to his behavior. During their time at the Shino Academy, they had often seen him training in the training grounds. As for the examiners, they had all heard of Kyoya's reputation. They were also aware that Aizen, the lieutenant of the 5th Division, had once extended an invitation to Kyoya, only to be turned down. Rumor had it that Kyoya intended to join the 11th Division. Judging by his current demeanor, he certainly fit the style of those battle maniacs. The difference was that the members of the 11th Division were more inclined toward fighting hollows or sparring with other Shinigami. Kyoya, from what they could see, still focused most of his energy on training. Of course, it was also possible that the students of Shino Academy were simply too weak to ignite Kyoya's passion for battle. Well, to be fair, even excluding Kyoya, none of the other examiners, aside from the lead examiner, stood much of a chance against him either. This wasn't an exaggeration. Even without his Kanatsu, Kyoya's combat prowess was such that most of them would struggle to defeat him. After all, among their team of examiners, only 3 had Reiatsu at the 7th class or higher. The rest were all 8th class. While they're already elite Shinin within the Gotei 13, they're still far inferior to Kyoya. On this day, Kyoya was practicing the fusion of swordsmanship and slashes as usual when he suddenly sensed an intense surge of malice. And quote, a hollow, and quote, without hesitation, Kyoya leaped from the ground, using Shunpo to create footholds of Reishi beneath his feet, standing mid-air as he turned his gaze toward the direction his observation haki had detected the hostility. His abrupt movement quickly drew the attention of the examiner Shinigami. After all, for the past few days, Kyoya had done nothing but train when he wasn't sleeping. Though they couldn't quite understand why the range of his slashes seemed to be shrinking the more he practiced, they knew that Kyoya's current achievements couldn't simply be attributed to genius alone. They admitted that even if they possessed the same zanjutsu talent as Kyoya, without his level of perseverance, they would never reach his current level. It was clear that even if Kyoya lacked his natural zanjutsu talent, his sheer determination would still have carried him far. Now that Kyoya had suddenly stopped training and taken to the air, it could only mean he had sensed something. Following his line of sight, the Shinigami soon noticed a thin black line forming in the space ahead. Then, as if torn open from within, the line split apart, ripping open a spatial fissure over 3 meters wide and 2 meters tall. A garganta. The dimensional passage hollows used to travel between the human world and Soul Society. Boom! A 3-meter tall, spider-like hollow emerged from the garganta, crashing onto the ground and leaving a massive crater in its wake. And quat. Hiss. Kyoya's strength is one thing, but even his ability Reiatsu is this sharp, and quat. Witnessing this, the Shinigami couldn't help but feel even more astonished. Shinigami naturally possessed Reiatsu, and thus, the ability to sense it. However, for most ordinary Shinigami, their detection range was limited to just a few meters. Of course, this also depended on the Reiatsu of both parties. For example, if a captain-level fighter fully unleashed their Reiatsu, nearly every Shinigami in Sairete would sense it. Additionally, there were Kido spells like Bakud number 58, Kakushitsuijaku and Bakud number 77, Tentaikura, which could vastly expand a Shinigami's Reiatsu perception range and even lock onto specific signatures within it. Yet, Kyoya's current display of Reiatsu perception was no less impressive than a Shinigami actively using Kakushitsuijaku. And quat. Is this what a true genius is like? And quat. Once again, the examiner. Shinigami were forced to confront the chasm between themselves and geniuses. What required spells and techniques for them was nothing more than basic perception for someone like Kyoya. Kyoya had no idea what the Shinigami were thinking. At this moment, he merely smirked, his expression perfectly mirroring his excitement.